On the 8th day of June, it is suitable for marriage. I straightened the last fold of the wedding gown for the woman in front of me, and put a golden fringed hair crown on her. This is the best Hoani brocade, embroidered with the highest standard phoenix pattern of the Song dynasty, which symbolizes the future dignity of the bride. This may be the wedding dress that most women dream of, but my sister is not happy. My elder sister, the widowed daughter of Qi state who was subjugated, and the most famous beauty in the world Zhang Kekai. In order to get her, the 4 countries fought in a scuffle, and the final winner, Song Qiujun, was finally able to marry my sister after annexing the other 3 countries. The woman in the bronze mirror has an astonishingly beautiful appearance, a perfect outline that cannot be drawn even with a painting, and it is even more beautiful under the full makeup. Kekai stroked her bun and said softly, "Juju, you still don't know how to comb your hair." I smiled and stroked her soft hair. "My sister always knows that I am stupid, do you want me to ask Emolan to comb her again?" Kekai grabbed my hand, she turned her head and looked at me. "What's the matter? Juju combed it for me with your own hands. And this marriage, anyway, can't be concluded." After she finished speaking, she was silent for a while, and tears gradually appeared in her eyes. "It's finally coming to an end, isn't it?" I hugged her and patted her on the back. "Yes, it will be over soon. My sister, she can finally end her grand revenge." "Are we going to die?" she asked tremblingly, hugging me. "We're all going to live." She looked up and looked at me blankly. In the past few years, she has always done what I say. I knew that she was prepared to burn herself to death from the very beginning, and she didn't know what to do if she wanted to survive well. What my sister did was revenge, what I did was to keep us alive, that's all. I can only do so much. The wedding is very lively. I heard that there are more than 10 countries, big and small, and each country sent congratulatory gifts and envoys to attend the wedding of the King of Song. I held my sister's hand and led her through the long red carpet, the fluttering petals and the grand drum music, through all the curious or flattering or contemptuous eyes. Naturally, all eyes were on the elder sister. After all, everyone wanted to see what kind of moving face this rumored beauty who caused troubles in the 4 countries had. The king sitting on the seat, who was over half 100 years old and still wearing the groom's red dress, smiled triumphantly. He just wanted to show off, showing off his achievements in defeating the 3 kingdoms and his beautiful concubine. Among the bustling and intertwined figures of the guests, a man who looked like a guard suddenly jumped up the steps very quickly and threw himself on King Song. The blood spattered 3 feet, King Song's smile froze on his face, and he looked at the dagger stuck in his chest in disbelief, piercing his heart exactly. As soon as the assassin succeeded, he drew his knife and killed himself, fell to the ground and died. As if time was frozen, no one made a sound in the hall, only the drums of the celebration continued to play enthusiastically, celebrating the tragedy absurdly. "I don't know who shouted, Your Majesty." All the guests were in a commotion as if they had just woken up from a dream. I couldn't help laughing when I saw Li Yan, the eldest son who was running towards King Song's corpse with an anxious expression on his face but carelessness in his eyes. This scene was really bloody, and it came faster than I imagined. Presumably, Li Yan, who is so talented and ambitious, has long been impatient with his father. What's more, if he doesn't do anything, his father will marry his beloved woman. Kekai grabbed my hand tightly. She has always been kind and innocent, and she will panic when she sees blood. Although I told her long ago that this marriage was impossible, she definitely did not expect such a situation. I calmly said to Kekai Fuer, "The 4 kingdoms that destroyed Qi lost 3, and the king of 1 country died. Li Yan did not participate in the crusade against Qi. He loves you very much, and you can follow him with peace of mind." Kekai's voice was a little trembling. I couldn't hear what she said amidst the hustle and bustle of life, I just felt that she was holding my hand tightly, which hurt a little. My gaze crossed the period and met the gaze of another person. He is a young man dressed in brocade, with a pair of phoenix eyes that seem to be smiling but not smiling, and his lips are slightly raised. The color of the eyes is not as dark as ordinary people, but a crystal clear ember color. I thought that after seeing such a beauty as Kikai, I would no longer find anyone beautiful, but he still amazes me. It was a slender, healthy, and proud beauty, and an elegant breath emanating from the bones. This is a kind of temperament that is easy to fascinate, like a light in the fog. I can guess that as long as he smiles, countless girls will be willing to fly moths into the abyss for him. Judging by his hairstyle and clothing, it doesn't seem to be the style of any particular country, but it seems that he often travels in various countries. The 8 beautiful maidservants stood behind him, all of them lowered their eyebrows and kept their eyes down, indifferent to the farce at the wedding. Seeing me looking at him, he tilted his head and smiled slightly. Under his gentle appearance, he looked like a hunter sizing up his prey. After finally calming down, Li Yan said in a deep voice to all the guests, "Father was assassinated and died. I will definitely find the real culprit for him. As for Mrs. Qi, Mrs. Zhang, the person who caused the disaster is an ominous person. Pull him down and give him death." Over the years, her reputation has not been good, and the wars in the 4 countries were caused by her, and her reputation as a disaster has become very popular. In name of giving Zhang Kikai to death, he wants to give his people and his ministers an explanation. I lip-synced to Kikai, "It's okay, he won't hurt you." This time, Kikai's voice was very clear, and she asked me, "What about you?" She stared at me with a pair of apricot eyes that were about to cry, pulling me and refusing to let go. I smiled and let go of her hand. "We are going to part here, Kikai." Just as the soldiers were about to pull me down, someone said, "Wait a minute." I watched the young man in brocade clothes come out from the crowd, and saluted Li Yan. "I wonder if your highness can sell this maid to his majesty in order to save face." Li Yan glanced at me, "What he loves is period, and I'm just an insignificant existence." So he said, "Chu Chu is a maid, the second son of Ji is serious." As soon as this remark came out, there was an uproar in the crowd. The second son of Ji Jiu, such a famous person, also came. He was originally the second son of the current emperor of Zhou. 5 years ago, his mother, stepfather and elder brother were abolished, and after the emperor was reinstated, he left the capital Luyi to travel among the princes. Jiu was unpredictable and capricious, and did not accept any official position in any country, and made suggestions for whichever country he came to, most of which were related to war. I heard that he is gentle, but his words are sharp and his arguments are excellent. There is no plan that is not accepted, and there is no plan that does not work after being adopted. I don't know how many wars have been fought because of Jiu these years, and how many countries have risen and fallen because of him. When you are angry and the princes are afraid, and you live in peace and the world is quiet, you are the #1 lobbyist in the world. The sedan chair was a little bumpy, and it didn't know how long it had been walking, and suddenly stopped. I stepped out of the sedan chair, only to see Jiu standing in front of me, and the 8 maidservants standing far away. He was dressed in a purple fine attire, a gentleman like a jade, just in response to his name. He smiled charmingly and saluted me. "Jiu has met His Royal Highness 9th Princess." I waved my hand. "It's nothing more than a princess who has lost her country. Your Highness, as you are, you don't need to salute anyone." Jiu smiled but said nothing, but there was some contempt in that smile. I was silent for a while, and asked, "Why did you save me, young master?" Jiu hooked her lips. "If I don't save you, you will have a way to escape, right? With the princess's intelligence, it would be a pity to fall into the hands of others." I laughed. "My cleverness. Everyone knows that the 7th princess is a good trick, which can attract the 4 countries that are allies to kill each other. But the kings of the 4 countries are not fools, and the 7th princess is just a bait. The huge plan behind this is from your hands." I was stunned. Only Kikai and I knew about this matter. How did he know about it as a foreigner? He seemed to know my doubts, and laughed. Ji has also met the 7th princess, she is indeed an unparalleled beauty. It is a pity that the 7th princess has a pure heart and has not been deeply involved in the world. She is just an ordinary daughter's family. Planning? As for the 9th princess, Ji once heard a friend mentioning you, and from observations during this period, His Highness is not someone who is waiting for you. So as soon as the period happened, you were guessing who was behind the scenes. You came to the wedding this time because of me, isn't it? Good. Your Highness is so troublesome, what exactly do you want? I want a maid who is also a helper. I frowned, why do you think I will promise you? He laughed, because Princess Ju is a smart person and knows the pros and cons. There is poison in the water you just drank. There is no way to eradicate this poison. You have to take the antidote every 3 months. If you don't take it within 5 days after the deadline, you will be rehabilitated. Died of poison. And I am the only person in this world who knows the antidote. He also said the threatening words lightly and easily, very calmly. But I didn't feel angry either. Since there is no unreasonable help in this world, he is not a gentleman but he is also a villain, to be honest. Servant, please see the young master. I bowed my head and saluted. There was approval in his smile, but his voice faded, as if he was stating a fact. Princess Ninth is dead from now on. You are the maid I got from Zhang Kikai. Your name is Aji. As he understands. I lowered my head, and under my eyes was a corner of Jiu's clothes, dark purple silk embroidered with dark flowing cloud patterns. Floating clouds of the past, fleeting clouds and mist, all kinds of things in the world are just a few lines of ink in the history books. In the past, Master Taishi Ling of Qi State always said this to me. From now on, there will be no Zhang Juking in the world, and no one will call me Juju softly. Zhang Juking was buried in the dust together with Qi Guo without a sound. In the future, if someone is free to think about the past of Qi State, the beauty Zhang Kikai, the 4 countries turned against each other, it is another story of loving beauty but not country. No one would know that a woman named Zhang Juking died at the wedding that shook the world. Jiu had a total of 8 maidservants: Xia Wan, Chang Li, Nansu, Mo Xiao, Lai Ying, Ling Chang, Zi Cao, and Bai Lu from eldest to youngest. Although these 8 maidservants are not as peerless as expected, they are all first-class beauties, and their food and clothing are also excellent, much more noble than ordinary maidservants. Each of them has a set of exclusive things, from clothes to jewelry. So the first thing I did after I became Aji was to be dragged to Jingxiachuan, the best silk shop in Song Dynasty, to pick out clothes. When I pointed out those pieces of silk cloth, Jiu seemed a little surprised. He said, I didn't expect you to like sky blue so much. After that, he looked at me carefully and laughed. It's quite suitable for you, but all it's azure, it's too monotonous. Liaying, Changle, go and pick some fabrics for her. The 2 women agreed, and picked out a few horses in a short time. They were indeed beautiful materials, and they were very suitable for me. Afterwards, I went to a rouge shop and a jewelry shop. All the items were made to order. Although I didn't know much about the prices on the market, I also knew that it cost a lot, but Jiu didn't care at all. It was rumored that Mr. Jiu was good at doing business, and he was already rich beyond compare during his travels in various countries. I think this rumor is true. As soon as the clothes arrived, I was ordered to change clothes and sit in front of the mirror, and let the 4 women dress up for a while, with their heads in a bun, rouge, and powder. When everything was settled, I looked at myself in the mirror, barely recognizable. Another beautiful face appeared above my face in the mirror, but the girl of 16 or 17 smiled innocently. Sister Aji is not bad looking, she must have been with the big beauty for a long time, and she doesn't have the confidence to dress up anymore. It looks really nice after tidying up like this. I turned around, and the girl in the pink and purple skirt was standing behind me. She only thought of me as Kikai's handmaid, with undisguised surprise and praise in her eyes. She stared at her to the end. I laughed and took her hand. "You are so beautiful, Zikao." Zikao was the first girl who chatted and laughed with me. It didn't mean that the other girls were hostile to me, but they didn't like to get too close to strangers. Gu has many rules, Xiaowan and Nansu told me about his taboo temper one by one. The days passed quickly, and in a blink of an eye, the national funeral and the succession ceremony were completed, and Li Yan became the new king of Song. It is said that he has appointed a new Mrs. Zhen, although she is extremely doted on, but Mrs. Zhen's health is not very good, and she is rarely seen in the palace. As the sun sets, the magnificent palace is dyed golden red, as attractive as a fairy palace. It is a place that the world yearns for. I took one last look at the palace, turned around and followed Gu onto the big boat. Mrs. Jane, he regards you as a treasure, but he will never be able to let you live under the sun. Bye-bye. Gu was about to leave the state of Song and take a boat to the state of Fan. I don't know what he intends to do, but I didn't ask too much. He will tell me when he needs me. I never knew that boats were such scary things. When I lay on the railing for the 5th time, I couldn't vomit anything anymore. My stomach was rolling and entangled, my mind was dizzy, and I felt dizzy no matter what I looked at. I grabbed the railing and slowly slid to the ground, rubbing my forehead with my free other hand, trying to stop the noise in my head. Zikao said that it is good to get used to it. The young master often travels by boat when he travels around the world. As I was dizzy, a pair of satin shoes appeared in my field of vision. I looked up and saw Jiu's frowning. He is dressed in Song Kuyan-i's satin clothes today, elegant gentleman, but there is a trace of anger in his eyes. The people who can get on this boat are either rich or noble. He probably thinks that I am embarrassing him, and I don't want to be like this. He just paused in front of me, then turned his head and left, leaving a sentence, "Clean yourself up, there is sour plum soup in the kitchen." After drinking sour plum soup for a few days, maybe I gradually got used to the boat and basically stopped vomiting, only occasionally a little dizzy. So I have the habit of standing on the deck and blowing the wind. The road from Song State to Fan State is mostly mountainous. I often look at the green mountains and forests on the bank. The mountains are smoky and full of vitality. Sometimes I would meet a young woman, who was wearing gorgeous clothes in the style of Zhao State, and the gold-encrusted white jade around her waist was something that only the Zhao family could wear. It seems to be a member of the Zhao family. It stands to reason that the nobles are watching the scenery in the house or in the pavilion, and it is not common to go to the deck like this, so I can't help but look at her more from a distance. She always leans on the railing beside the deck to watch the scenery, followed by a group of maidservants. Her eyes are dim. When I saw her again today, there was no maidservant around her, and her face was full of tears. She didn't cry aloud, it was like sleepwalking, her eyes were empty, only tears kept falling. It seems that she shouldn't be disturbed at this time. I was about to go back to my room when I saw her suddenly climb over the railing and jump down. By the time I realized it, I had rushed over and grabbed her hand. She is hanging on the wall of the boat, with the turbulent river under her feet. As long as I let go, she will fall into the river. I shouted, "Come on! Someone is going to fall into the water." She began to struggle as if waking up from a dream, trying to get rid of my hand, and her fingers drew blood on my arm. I held her tightly, using almost all my strength. She cried, "Let me go and let me die. My child is gone, my family is gone, and everything is gone." I was stunned, and couldn't help chuckling. So what? Maybe it was my expression and my overly natural tone that surprised her. She stared at me blankly without saying a word. During the conversation, many people rushed over, and several of them helped me pull the young woman up. She didn't know when she stopped struggling, let us pull her up and fell to the ground as if she lost her soul. Her face was extremely pale against the blue dress. 3 or 4 maidservants ran over with their skirts in their hands, and hurriedly helped the young woman up without regard to etiquette. A man in a black robe with clear eyebrows broke through the crowd and ran to the young woman, raised his hand and slapped the young woman, and then hugged the young woman fiercely when the young woman was at a loss. He was very hard, as if he wanted to melt her into his body. He leaned close to the young woman's ear and said something. The young woman trembled twice, and finally hugged him tightly, and began to cry loudly. He said, "How can you bear to leave me?" Many well-dressed nobles who rushed to hear the sound also spoke words of comfort. Jiyu was also standing among them, looking down at me from a distance, with a playful smile, as if she had discovered something novel. I ignored his gaze, just stood aside, watching the couple hug each other and cry. Feeling calm and dazed. After everyone dispersed, Jiyu walked up to me. He pulled my arm and looked at the bloodstains on my arm. His smile was full of novelty and full of probing. "I didn't expect you to be so excited." I let him hold my arm and quietly looked at the river. "It's so easy to give up life." "Oh." I turned my head and saw Jiyu's slightly surprised expression. He looked at me with a probing look, which he often used to look at me during this time, as if he could see some answer from my face. He wanted to recruit me to be his helper, but he was on guard against me in his heart. In fact, it doesn't matter, if he wants an answer, I'll tell him. My biological mother is not Queen Chi. I can't remember my biological mother's appearance, but she has shallow dimples, and she smiles very beautifully. When she died, she had no other wishes for me, only hope I lived on. At that time, I was still very young, so I was sent to the queen to be raised. The queen was not bad to me, and the cost of food and clothing never shortened my life, but her love period, I was only her responsibility. I still remember the day when the Qi state fell. The father killed the queen mother, and then hanged himself in the palace with a white silk. Before the enemy invaded, the palace was noisy, and the maids ran around crying helplessly. Someone accused me of being ruthless. My country died, my parents hanged themselves, but I didn't shed a tear from the beginning to the end. Maybe, I don't have time to grieve, I have to find a way to keep me and Kikai alive. I am 16 years old when Qi was destroyed, I am 21 years old today, and I have survived for a full 5 years. Jiyu's eyes flickered, and she was silent for a long time before she spoke. "Why are you telling me these things?" I just shook my head, turned and went back to the room. "Yet, why did I tell you? You just listen to it as a joke." He said behind me, "The person you saved today is Nan Huijun's wife, she was originally Princess Changni of Korea." I turned to look at him when I heard the words, and he looked into my eyes, as if trying to read my mind. I couldn't help but smile, and said without emotion, "Really? Then Mr. Nan Hui owes me a favor." The moment I closed the door, I saw his frown. As we all know, the 9th princess of Qi state and Huijun of Zhao state had a marriage contract since childhood. After the fall of Qi, Lord Nanhua broke his contract and married Princess Changni of South Korea. South Korea was one of the 4 countries that captured Qi, and of course it was destroyed by Song. What a joke! What does Jiyu hope to see in my face? Anger? Resentment? Or hate? Then he might be disappointed. To me, Nan Huijun is just a man who has only seen him from a distance and has forgotten his appearance. I don't hate him for breaking the promise and marrying the princess of the enemy country when I was most in danger, because to him, I am just a person with no affection. Whether he is happy or unlucky is not my concern. Jiyu's rule is that 2 maidservants will serve her personally every day during the journey, and the rest will be handled by themselves. Chong Li and Lai Ying were the ones who waited on him yesterday, so when Chong Li knocked on my door this morning, I guessed that Nan Huijun had something to do. Chong Li is dressed in a rose-red jigsaw, and her agate red earrings sway gently with her footsteps. She is also outstanding in appearance among the 8 beauties, but she is an ice beauty, arrogant and glamorous, and does not like to talk to people. She took me to Jiyu's place, keeping a cold face and not saying a word all the way. When she was about to reach the place, she suddenly said, Aji, I don't care what your status was before, you are now the sun's servant, and a servant must behave like a servant. I looked at her, and she looked at me coldly with her beautiful eyes, and curled her lips without emotion. Don't expect me to be as naive as that girl Zikao, thinking that you are just Zhang Kikai's maid. Zhang Kikai? Shouldn't you call him His Royal Highness 7th Princess? I said lightly. She smiled, and said contemptuously, what kind of highness is a princess who has lost her country? Take 10,000 steps back, so what if she is the daughter of Emperor Zhou? Chang'e is the sun's maid, and Chang'e only respects the sun in this world. We arrived after a while. She raised the bead curtain, nodded slightly, and said softly to the people inside, My lord, we're here. Okay, you can go to rest. The voice inside was very gentle, low, and there was an illusion of extreme gentleness in a trance. I just realized that this was the first time I listened to him carefully, without any calculations or precautions, just listening to the voice of Gu. It is undeniable that his voice is nice, gentle, and calm, which can make people feel trustworthy. I looked at the rosered back who was going away, turned and entered the room. So even such a proud girl is willing to bow her head for you? The layout of the room is very elegant, and the smoke from the incense burner is filled with smoke, which is the unique Yuexuan incense of Zhao state. Sure enough, Mr. Nanhuai was also in the room, and Ji Yu stood beside him, smiling as if entertaining an old friend, and said to Mr. Nanhuai, I've already brought you here, so I won't bother you. Exited the room. Mr. Nanhuai nodded to me and said, Miss, please sit down. I bowed my head and saluted, I dare not accept it. He laughed heartily, Miss, you are serious. You saved my wife's life. You are my benefactor. Why don't you dare to accept it? Please sit down. So I stopped giving way and sat in front of Mr. Nanhuai. I asked, I wonder if Madam is better. He smiled wryly, and said softly, she's better, but she's still in a bad mood. I lowered my eyes and remained silent. The situation of South Korea being destroyed was not much better than that of Qi state. Almost all the nobles were slaughtered, and Princess Changni's relatives were not spared. Recently, it was heard that her first child died young. After several blows, Princess Changni should not feel well. I said lightly, I've watched too much about the ups and downs in this world, Madam will naturally feel relieved. He was stunned for a moment, and then laughed, it seems that the maidservant of the 7th princess is really extraordinary. Which 7th princess? Now that the 7th princess is mentioned, who else can there be besides the 7th princess from Qi? I am silent. If he just wanted to thank me, as my current servant, he could send some money casually, but he took the trouble to meet me through Gu, which shows that there must be other things. The following is probably about to get to the point. Have you ever seen the 9th princess? He was silent for a while, and finally opened his mouth. I froze for a moment, I didn't expect that he wanted to inquire about me. He had a guilty look on his face. It seems that he didn't take things as seriously as I did 5 years ago. Of course I've seen it. The 7th princess and the 9th princess have been inseparable since they were young. The slave is the 7th princess maid, that is, the 9th princess maid. He hesitated for a while before opening his mouth. How is she, now? She died. I said lightly, she died at the wedding banquet of the Song dynasty, together with the 7th princess. He was obviously stunned, with some sadness between his brows, and he opened his mouth to say something, but in the end he could only sigh, I'm still sorry for her after all. I don't know, how can you be sorry for Princess 9? He was taken aback again, he probably thought that as a person from Qi, he still knew Princess 9, so he should hate him and accuse him. I broke my engagement to her. I looked at the self-blaming man in front of me, and couldn't help but want to laugh. You are mistaken, what you have broken is the agreement with the Qi state, the agreement with the king of Qi. There is no agreement between you and the 9 princesses. So what you are sorry for is the state of Qi, the king of Qi, not the 9 princesses. He seemed a little dazed. I paused and said again, Princess Ninth doesn't hate you, it's the same for her to marry you or anyone else, she didn't choose it by herself. What's more, now that you have a wife, if you had married Princess Nine back then, wouldn't you have met your wife? His brows gradually loosened, and he asked, Really? I laughed, I swear by my wealth and life. So he also laughed, and seemed a little relieved. It seems that I overestimated my influence on the 9th princess. The world praises the beauty of the 7th princess, but I think the 9th princess is also a beauty after hearing what you said. It's a pity. I picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. There was a thin drizzle outside the window, and the wind was also wet and warm. It reminds me of a rainy day many years ago, when Kikai took me to a rockery in the palace, pointed to a boy who was walking far away and said, Juju, he is your future husband. In a flash, he was only 14 or 15 years old at that time, wearing a purple coat, without an umbrella, and his figure was very immature. At that time, I didn't look at him carefully, but a boy in light yellow clothes appeared in my mind, smiling innocently. Thinking about it now, the reason why I can be so relieved may be because before him, I have already put another person in my heart. After that meeting, I have never seen Mr. Nanhuai again, and I think this grievance, which is not really a grievance, has been properly settled. If one day the underworld meets, I will be spared the need to explain. But Ji often called me over at the beginning. In the days when I just became Aji, I actually rarely saw Ji. Most of the time it was Xiaowan or Lai Ying who came to teach me the rules, and other girls conveyed Ji's meaning. He seemed very busy and wasn't in a hurry for me to do anything. When I went to his room for the first time, he was wearing white single clothes, with a game of chess in front of him, propped his forehead, and looked at me with a pair of phoenix eyes smiling. Can you play chess? He asked me this. I shook my head, no. He rested his chin on his hand, and pointed to the opposite seat with a gesture of no mind, sit down, I'll teach you. I should sit opposite him, and he took all the pieces on the chess game and put them into the rattan box. Under the swaying lights, his fingers were white and slender, with thin calluses on the fingertips and the tiger's mouth. They were a pair of good-looking chess players' hands. Do you know why I am going to Fan Country? He asked while collecting the chess pieces. I don't know. You might as well take a guess. I raised my eyes to meet his gaze, and there was a hint of sharpness in his casual smile. So I thought about everything he had done recently, and replied, Young master came from the state of Yu. I heard that the state of Wu and the state of Zhao formed an alliance to send troops to fight against the state of Yu. Force the capital city of the Yu Kingdom to say that the destruction of the Yu Kingdom is just a matter of time. If another country comes to save it, it will attack that country after the Yu Kingdom is destroyed. The Yu Kingdom and the Fan Kingdom have always been on good terms. Did the king of the country ask Fan for help? Ji smiled non-committal, but asked, Who told you that I came from Yu Kingdom? I looked at him, that's how it was. He knew that those 8 girls wouldn't tell me anything. Thinking about their estrangement from me, even Zikar rarely mentioned to me about their previous journey and Ji's affairs, all of this must have come from his instruction. He's still wary of me, which is normal. I shook my head, no one told me. I saw a crimson robe when I was collecting clothes for the young master earlier. It is the most noble style of the Yu Kingdom after the royal family. It is very new and it is placed on the top. It should be a new one. The current situation of the Yu state, it must be something to ask for something to give the young master such an honorable gift, so it is probably related to this war. The Yu state is adjacent to the Song state and the Fan state. It's also the fastest way. Ji stroked the chess piece in her hand, was silent for a while, and looked at me with a half smile. You guessed right. Sometimes I'm really curious, how do you know so many things? The situation of the world, the customs of each country, the system of ritual and music. I was taught by Lord Tai Shilling of the Qi state when he was still alive. I read more books and listen to more stories on weekdays. After the fall of the Qi state, I also wandered abroad for a while and saw some things in the world. I said it very frankly. Gu chuckled lightly, with a bit of inquiry and a bit of approval in his eyes. The white piece in his hand landed in the center of the chessboard, and he said leisurely, "Let's play chess." I played a game of chess with Gu back and forth according to Gu's teaching. He was very patient, and he obviously gave way to me with every step of the way. It seems that today is very leisurely and wants to spend time with me. I remembered something, so I asked him, "I heard from Xiaowan that I will arrive in Peking tomorrow, and the ship will dock for supplies. Can I get off the ship?" "Are you going to Peking? You can return before sunset, and you won't miss the time of sailing. If you are worried, ask someone to come with me." Gu smiled, but didn't try to stop her. "You go, I'll ask Li Ding to accompany you." Among Gu's many servants, the 9 maidservants together with me are the highest, and the rest are male servants. There are about 20 people, all of them are strong men. Li Ding is such the leader of the servants. He is a man of great strength and a taciturn person on weekdays. The next morning I arrived a little earlier than the agreed time, and Li Ding was already waiting. He didn't smile very much, and after saying hello, he didn't speak any more, but just walked beside me with a lamp, and I followed him off the boat. There was a heavy fog in Peking today, and there was a vast expanse of whiteness everywhere, so I couldn't tell the difference. I groped along the path to inquire about a village on the outskirts of the city. I grabbed a thin old man and asked, "Excuse me, is this Luya village?" The old man nodded and said yes. "Does Lu Shi's widow, the Lu Zhou family live here?" The old man looked at me in surprise, then looked at Li Ding beside me, and said, "Last year, Mrs. Lu Zhou died of starvation. Why did you look for her?" I was silent for a while, and did not answer his question. "Then is his child still alive?" "His youngest son died of illness 2 years ago, and now there is only one eldest son left, who is being raised by brother Lu Shi." The old man shook his head and sighed. He didn't have much compensation when he died in the battle, leaving this orphan and widow mother. It's really miserable to catch up with the disaster year again. The fog cleared a little, and I saw that we were in a field, but the crops were sparse. I asked the old man to take me to find Lu Shi's son. The old man said that today is the anniversary of Lu Zhou's death, and Lu Shi's eldest son should be in the village cemetery now. This day is very coincidental. Li Ding and I followed the old man to the village cemetery. At that time, the fog was still thick, and the area around the cemetery looked gloomy. When the old man was about to reach the cemetery, a crowd of crows cried out one after another. He looked a little embarrassed, and turned to me and said, "If you don't wait here, miss, Duzi should be back soon." I shook my head and reached out to Li Ding. "Lend me the lamp, I can go alone. Master wants me to protect the girl." Li Ding didn't agree with me walking alone, and he didn't look at me. I looked at Li Ding for a while, and said, "Today is Wangri. I heard that the custom of Zhengguo is taboo to look at the sun and enter the cemetery. I thought you were from Zhengguo." Li Ding's usual stern and silent expression finally showed a little wavering. He looked at me suspiciously. "How does the girl know?" Halfway through the question, he stopped and replied, "The villain was originally from Zhengguo, but he followed the sun. Traveling in various countries, I also know the principle of doing as the Romans do." I nodded and didn't insist any more. After thanking the old man, he walked into the foggy cemetery together with Li Ding. Although Li Ding said he didn't care, he was still a little nervous. When the child appeared in the mist, I looked at him a little stiffly. People in the state of Zheng respect ghosts and gods the most, so it is really difficult for Li Ding. The child was kneeling in front of a tombstone and burning paper. When he saw us, he groped and stood up from the ground, looking at us with a pair of big round eyes. Probably in such a foggy day, meeting in such a cemetery, he would also be quite frightened. Are you Ilyushi's son? I leaned down and asked him. He is thin and weak, like those sparse crops, and he looks like he is only in his early 10 years old. He nodded tremblingly, looked at me and then at Li Ding, his voice trembling, what are you? It seems that we are regarded by him as a generation of ghosts who want to kill us. I took out a blood-stained letter from my pocket and handed it to him. This is a letter that your father didn't post before he died. He asked me to bring it to your mother. Since your mother is dead, please give me the letter. You. He took the letter in a daze, opened the envelope and looked at it for a while, then looked up at me helplessly. I can't read. I took the letter in his hand and looked at his mother's tombstone, then I'll read it. My wife, Hong Feng, sees the words like faces. There are many emergency casualties in the war, and I may not return in the battle tomorrow. If I don't return, don't wait for me. You are still in your prime, and you can still find a good relationship. I miss you very much, and I often recall my youth. We depend on each other and expect to grow old, and may you be protected by your beloved for the rest of your life. Dallin Erlang is especially cute, and his appearance has become blurred after not seeing him for many years. I can't stop crying when I read this, and I hope you are in good health. The tombstone stood quietly in a gloomy and cold mist, and the crows stopped making noise. It was as if someone was really here listening to the letter. The letter writer Ilyushi found made many typos, but his writing style was acceptable. Presumably he had already met his wife in Huangchuan, so he should have told his wife the meaning of this letter perfectly. I often recall that when I was young, I depended on each other and expected to grow old. May you be protected by your beloved for the rest of your life. In the end, his wife didn't have the chance to marry someone else, but died as his wife. I received the letter and folded it and handed it to his son. He probably didn't quite understand the meaning of the letter, but his eyes were still red. He took the letter in his arms and looked at me eagerly. My lord, my father is it a hero? Hero? There are so many heroes in this world. I looked at him for a while, then shook my head. Your father is just an ordinary man. One of the tens of thousands of ordinary soldiers who died in the expansion of the Song dynasty. But your father loves you very much. The person he loves the most now is only you living in this world. I leaned down and said to him, this is the most important thing. In the end, I bowed to the tombstone and left with Li Ding. It was noon at this time, and the sunlight gradually became stronger and the fog dissipated. There was only a thin layer of water vapor in the air, which did not block the sight much. A child's cry came from far away. Li Ding seemed a little unbearable. He paused but still didn't turn his head. I was back on board in only half a day. That night when I was learning how to play chess with Jiu, he asked me, you went to Peking to deliver a letter for this man named Ilyushi. I nod. What's so special about him? You don't seem like someone who meddles in this kind of business. He put down a piece on the chessboard, and then took a lot of pieces. I stopped to think, and met his smiling eyes. Kikai and I passed through the battlefield on the way to Songdu. He climbed out of the dead, gave me his letter and his name and hometown, and died. I didn't want to care about it, but I didn't have time to refuse. Jiu seemed to believe it or not, and shook his head with a light smile. He pointed to a place on the chessboard. You fall here. I followed his instructions to play chess, and he propped his chin and said slowly, now do you still have unrepented grudges? I never had a grudge. Korea Zhengguo and Cai Guo were destroyed, and Song Qiujun was assassinated. Didn't you avenge the destruction of Qi state? That's Kikai's hatred, not mine. Jiu raised his eyes from the chessboard, and looked at me with a pair of beautiful phoenix eyes, which seemed a little provocative. The old country was destroyed, the father, the queen and the queen committed suicide. You fell from a high-ranking princess to a slave overnight. Don't you resent it? I chuckled. I seem to have answered this question for many people. When she first started to help Kikai get revenge, she also blamed me for being too ruthless and indifferent to the destruction of the Qi country. However, hundreds of years have passed since the Emperor of Zhou unified the world and divided the princes into feudal lords. Now the royal family of Zhou has declined, and it is not uncommon for the vassals to fight against each other. How many countries, big or small, have been destroyed in the past 100 years? Can't Qi be destroyed? Most of the monarchs who died will go with the country, my father will be an exception. Qi is already such a land, without the alliance of the four countries, sooner or later if another country invades, it will be destroyed sooner or later. If you really want to complain, it is just that my father is not good at governing the country, and he has already died for the country, so there is really no other complaint. Ji Yu looked at me for a long while, with surprise in her usual smiling eyes. That's your parents? So. I looked at him, he was silent for a moment, and said slowly, so you don't blame me? I threatened you to be my slave and took away your freedom. Freedom is good, it's a very good thing. But it's a luxury after all. If you don't have enough food and clothing, there's no room for talking about freedom. I placed a piece on the chessboard, he looked up to meet his piercing gaze. I bought off the soldiers that day, and buried a fortune outside the palace. After escaping, I can eat and drink for a while. But after all, I have no power to restrain a chicken. In this troubled world, I fled alone with the treasure. I am afraid that my life will be in danger. You took away my freedom, and you also saved my life to provide me with food and clothes. This is a very fair business, why do I hate you? He looked at me for a while, then looked at the chessboard, smiled and shook his head, Chang Shenjia, draw. I lowered my eyes, young master is a good guide. He put the chess piece in his hand back into the rattan box, and said slowly, you are really, interesting weirdo. When they arrived in Fan country, Fan Qiabo waited for Xiang Shaya to have prepared a banquet for Ji Yu. Needless to say, the room Ji Yu lives in is of high class, even 2 of our 9 maidservants have a room. Zikao and I were divided together, and we unloaded the suitcases we had carried all the way and put things away. The room is very spacious, but it seems that our things are pitifully small. After tidying up, we sat on the bed and chatted. I asked Zikao, who did you live with? She pursed her mouth, Bai Lu, that guy is like a mute, he can't speak a word for 3 days, it's really boring. I laughed. Bai Lu is the youngest here, Xiaowan's younger sister, she is usually silent, she is not as calm as a child of this age, and Zi Kao is 2 extremes. After resting for a long time, someone knocked on the door. I opened the door and saw that it was Mo Xiao who was next door. She said flatly, Sister Wan wants me to pass on a message. The banquet starts at the next hour, so don't miss it. I leaned forward and said, please trouble Miss Mo Xiao. She was about to leave, but when she heard the words, she turned around and looked at me with a hint of doubt in her eyes, how do you know I'm Mo Xiao? Nansua and Mo Xiao are very similar twins, there is almost no difference in appearance, even their frowns and smiles are the same. They like to wear light blue or light purple clothes on weekdays, which are elegant and clean, with watery hibiscus. I smiled lightly, secret. In fact, the only difference I can find between them is that Mo Xiao hates me, and Nansu has no feelings for me. The disgust in her eyes cannot be faked. Looking at the way Mo Xiao looked at me, I knew she was Mo Xiao. Sure enough, Mo Xiao laughed, but there was no smile in his eyes. How long do you think your cleverness can last? I really don't know what you know, so please don't hold us back. At the banquet, I understood the meaning of Mo Xiao's words. Each of the 8 of them has their own musical instruments, and their skills have reached the point of proficiency. Coupled with the seamless cooperation, listening to Zikao's libretto of Dear Ming by them is like listening to the sound of nature. I smiled and stood silently in the darkness behind Ji Yu. I have always been clumsy in calligraphy, painting, and music, and I can only be ashamed to play a piece of music barely, and my appearance is not average, so I can't blame Mo Xiao for thinking I am useless. Fortunately, I have been suspected of it for more than 20 years, and I have long been used to it. Lord Xiang was dressed in green, but in his mid-twenties, with sword-like brows and bright eyes, and a heroic demeanor, he seemed to be a very straightforward person. He smiled and said to Ji Yu, "Everyone in the world knows that young Master Ji is the one who enjoys the most blessings. It is true that I heard the song Dear Ming today, and Xiang can also share in young Master Ji's blessing." Ji Yu raised the wine. "If not, I would like to thank Master Ho for his hospitality. Is the relationship between you and me still called so vivid? Then, Brother Xiang invites you. Brother Ji, please." Ji Yu was dressed in purple silk uniform, her black eyes were bottomless, and she was not inferior in the face of the heroic Xiang Shaya. His aura is not obviously compelling, but a hidden, quiet, silent coercion. Such and such, on the contrary, is even more frightening. The girl is very unfamiliar. A voice sounded beside me, and when I looked around, I saw a teenager with a smile on his face. The boy was dressed in moon-white clothes, his hair was high, he was delicate and clean, and he was in high spirits. I remembered that he was Xiang Shaya's confidant, and also Xiang Shaya's lieutenant general, named Zikan. He seemed a little embarrassed by my silence, and he explained, "Master Ji is a frequent visitor of the master, and the other 8 girls have met, but they have never met you." So I laughed, and replied, "The servant just followed the young master recently, and his name is Aji, Zhixi Ji." Seeing me reply, the boy's embarrassment eased somewhat. He said with a smile, "Hello, Miss Azi, I am Zi Chen, Lord Ho's close attendant, Zi of Zi Shu, and Chen of Chen Yu." From the girl's accent, I seem to be from the east. Yes, my hometown is the land of Pre-Chi. Sure enough, it's the country of Qi. I've seen many girls from the country of Qi, all of whom are thin and tall like Miss Azi. His ending sound rose slightly, with the joy of a young man. Zikan still wanted to say something, but the housekeeper called him to leave. He hurriedly waved his hand at me and said that we will talk next time. The high-spirited young man walks briskly. I looked at his back, then looked at the hosts at the table. I don't know if it was an illusion, I just felt that someone was watching here. After the banquet, Ji Yu called me to his room. His room was really gorgeous, with sandalwood incense curling from the Suani incense burner, the floor was covered with Liang-made carpets, and the seats were covered with gorgeous embroidered patterns. It is said that Fan Guo advocates luxury, and it is true. He pushed back the other waiters, and looked at me with a smile in his eyes, the half-smile I often see, full of probing eyes. He and General Xiang drank a lot, but they were very sober. The smell of alcohol on his body is also very light, it doesn't look like he has drunk so much wine. He's probably watered his wine, maybe he's a bad drinker, maybe he's a bad drinker. The key to the dispatch of troops lies with Lord Fan. He said leisurely. The Prime Minister's faction advocates not sending troops, while Shaya advocates sending troops. The two sides have been arguing for a long time, and Fan Jun has not yet made a decision. If I can meet Fan Jun, I am sure to persuade him. It's just that the king is ill now, and the Prime Minister is in charge. The Prime Minister listened, said that I would come, but really spent a lot of effort to prevent me from seeing the monarch, and now even Xiang Shaya, there is no way for me to see Fan Jun. Although he frowned, there was no sense of trouble in his eyes. This kind of matter should not be difficult to solve with his communicative skills. So I asked, "Is there anything I can do?" "Well, there is one thing." Shaya said that he has lived in a tent for a long time. This time he returned home and vaguely felt that there was someone sent by the Prime Minister in the mansion, but he didn't know who it was. It would be inconvenient to have an inner ghost. Please help find out the ghost. I smiled slightly, "I'm just a servant, you don't have to be so polite. It's my duty to share your worries and work for you. Jiyu was stunned, only recovered for a moment, and laughed. Shaya said, this time his deputy general Zi Chen will assist you in the investigation. I think you have met at the banquet. It's just a few words. He's a rather handsome boy. I raised my eyes to look at him. He propped his chin and looked at me with a smile. I said flatly, perhaps you should be more worried about Zikao than me. When I returned to the room, Zikao was already going to sleep. She sat on the bed and looked at me with some surprise. I thought you would stay with the young master tonight. He who loves him sleeps. Don't you love the young master? Zikao was a little confused, as if it was an incomprehensible idea not to love the young master. Do you love your son? I asked back. Zikao replied without thinking, love. Looking at her innocent and determined eyes, I couldn't help laughing. Then why have you been staring at Zikan today? I see that you have been looking at him much longer than young master. Zikao's face turned red at a speed visible to the naked eye. She yelled and buried her face in the quilt, leaving only my back with long black hair. He's good looking, I just took a few more glances. She softly defended, and then whispered, I respect and love you, and that doesn't stop me from liking a handsome young man. Just handsome. He also speaks very softly, what? Sister Azzy, you are playing tricks on me. She reacted and turned around to look at me, with a pair of big watery eyes lining her flushed face, her cheeks puffed out a little angrily. I shook my head with a smile, and climbed into bed after washing up. Zikao looked at me, and was finally a little discouraged. I'm just looking at it. I've been the sun's servant since the day I became the sun's servant, and I definitely can't be with others. I nod. Sister Aji, you don't even like the young master, so what do you like? Do you have anyone you like? She leaned over aggrieved. The moonlight was very good, and it shone brightly on her hair. I was silent for a while, then replied, yes. There used to be someone I liked very, very much, but my liking had nothing to do with love. That was a long, long time ago. Zikao's eyes lit up, then darkened again. She murmured, except for the sun, I have never had anyone I particularly like. And there is no one who particularly likes me. I laughed and patted her on the back, me too, the person I like doesn't like me. There should be no one in this world who really liked me, not even my father, my queen, even my period, even the person I like. The guy I like, I hope to meet by chance one day and let me know he's doing well. It's best if he doesn't recognize me and we just pass each other. I think this is a good thing. I looked at Zikao and said slowly, since no one likes you, you don't have to like anyone. You may be despised, trampled and destroyed, but you will never sad. Zikao stared at me blankly for a while, then she turned to look at the roof, feeling angry again. Sometimes I'm a little afraid of you, Sister Aji. She said sincerely. This is exactly the same as what Kikai said. She is only 16 years old this year, the same age as me when Chi State fell. I looked at her pretty facial features and innocent eyes. I once wondered why Jiyu would accept such a simple girl as Zi Kao as a maid. Is it just because of her good singing voice? Then I roughly understood that if his 8 maids were all mature, stable and well off, it would inevitably make people guard against suspicion. Zikao's naive detachment just neutralized this kind of inscrutability, which made people less prepared. If you want to inquire about news, you must use Zikao as a breakthrough point, so it's better not to let her know too much and keep an eye on her. Although Zikao is naive, she has a strict tone and worships Jiyu extremely, which cannot be controlled. Thinking that Jiyu is such a good chess player, every chess piece is carefully selected, and even the flaws are carefully designed. I patted Zikao on the back and said softly, go to sleep. The Xiang family has always been an aristocrat in the Fan Kingdom, and there have been 3 queens and 2 generals in their ancestors. Xiang Shaya is the mainstay of the Xiang family of this generation, hereditary to the position of Boyuhao, and he has been appointed as a general before he turned 30. He married Fan Jun's eldest daughter, Princess Yunyuan, and the husband and wife respected each other like a guest. They had 2 sons and a daughter. 5 years ago, Princess Yunyuan passed away due to illness, and Xiang Shaya has never married again. On weekdays, he likes to live in a tent, sleeps and eats with soldiers, and doesn't often go back to the house. Now Xiang Shaya's mansion lives with his mother and his concubine Mrs. Zhang. Mrs. Zhang has 2 children under her knees. Xiang Shaya also has a concubine, the Chu family. The Chu family is the most favored, and he lives with Xiang Shaya in the camp on weekdays. More than 2 months ago, when Xiang Shaya returned to the mansion, he started arguing with the Prime Minister about whether to send troops to Yu Kingdom. But every time he felt that the trick was seen through, the Prime Minister was always one step ahead of him, and Xiang Shaya couldn't help suspecting that there were spies in the house. Zikan told me these things. On the 2nd day after I took over the task, he came to take me around the house, and told me what he saw. I follow the master on weekdays, and I don't go back to the house often, so I may not know much. But you can find me if you need anything. He smiled at me friendly. As Zikao said, he is a handsome and kind boy, the man she likes the most at her age. I nodded and asked, since you don't always live in the mansion, why doesn't the general let Steward Su come to investigate? Butler Su was brought to the Xiang family by the old lady. If Butler Su finds out that there are spies in the house, he will definitely alarm the old lady. The general does not want to alarm the old lady. After a pause, Ziai Chen laughed again, showing his 2 canine teeth. Besides, Steward Su is strict and protective, so he definitely doesn't want to believe that there is something wrong with his servants. I looked at him and said lightly, maybe he's not a slave either. Ziai Chen was stunned for a moment, then said hesitantly, you mean? Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by the quarrel in front of him. I looked up and saw that the source of the quarrel was Chu and Zhang. Surrounded by a group of nuns and maidservants, Zhang's youngest daughter was rubbing her eyes and crying loudly. Zhang claimed that it was Chu who pushed her daughter. Chu looked at Zhang with a cold face and said nothing. I heard that Ms. Zhang is a capable and pungent woman, and she is very generous and domineering because there is no wife in the house. But Chu's temperament is lofty and indifferent, and he never pays attention to Zhang's. One of them relies on having children, and the other relies on being favored, but they are evenly matched. Mrs. Zhang satirized Mrs. Chu for not being able to have children. Mrs. Chu didn't seem to hear it, until Mrs. Zhang popped out a sentence, a woman who can't keep a queen is really embarrassing to her parents. At this moment, Mrs. Chu was looking at Mrs. Zhang. Her facial features were originally full of heroism, but Mrs. Zhang shivered when she glanced at her so coldly. My parents died for the country, and you can blame them at will. Zikan said softly to me, Chu's father and brothers are under the Lord Ho, and they are all loyal. Now she is the only one left in the family. Mrs. Zhang stared and was speechless. Mrs. Chu looked at her little daughter with a sneer, and said, you are so good at acting at such a young age, you really look like your mother. After finishing speaking, Mrs. Zhang turned blue, and left with his maidservants. Mrs. Zhang lost her temper and sent away all the maids and nuns around her. Father Wang is such a beautiful concubine, this scene is really familiar. Seeing Mrs. Chu walking towards us, Zikan and I bowed our heads in salute. Chu's footsteps stopped in front of us. She quietly asked, a new maid? Zikan said respectfully, you are the personal maid of Mr. Ji, Aji. Chu's eyes flicked between us, and her tone became a little bit harsh, you are as usual to please girls. This was a bit inexplicable, but she didn't say any more, and left with her maidservants. Zikan and I looked at each other. He shrugged and said with a smile, little Madam Chu has such a temperament. This does not seem to be simply a matter of temperament. You don't seem to have a good relationship. Little Madam Chu really doesn't like me very much. Why? I don't know, maybe I think I'm too detached? But Mrs. Chu doesn't like many people, and I'm not the only one. Ziyi Chen was quite helpless. After a pause, Zikan said, as for the matter between the wives, I don't really understand, just be careful not to interfere, the general hates house fights the most. I nod. Afterwards, Zikan still had his affairs to attend to, so I didn't bother him. I walked around the mansion by myself for more than 5 days. Fortunately, there were quite a lot of servants in Xiang's mansion, and they liked to chat on weekdays, which made it convenient for me to collect information. The Prime Minister puts eyeliner around Xiang Shaya. If it is just a small servant, it is of no value. The only ones who are close to Xiang Shaya in the mansion are his followers, the housekeeper, the old lady Mrs. Zhang and Mrs. Chu and their personal maids. Let's take a look. Sub reduced a lot. The reason why Xiang Shaya invited Jiu, an outsider, to investigate was probably because he was afraid of disturbing others, and he was afraid that rumors would hurt his peace. As Zikan said, under Steward Su's rule, the old lady was strict and generous, and the atmosphere in the Xiang family was always good, and theft and fights rarely happened. Every servant and servant who entered the mansion was innocent and seemed to have nothing to do with the Prime Minister. I was thinking silently, when I was passing through the Fuchu garden, I heard a burst of piano sound. Looking up, in the garden is a woman dressed in light yellow twill brocade, with a hairpin inlaid with fine South Sea pearls in her hair, and a little bright cinnabar on her forehead. She lowered her eyes and carelessly stroked the gherkin in front of her. Standing beside them were 9 maidservants, all dressed in blue, standing respectfully. I hesitated for a while, and was about to take a detour, but I heard the woman's indifferent but majestic voice, "Which family's maid is so inappropriate, you can hear my zither." She was still playing the cheen, without looking at me from the beginning to the end, but besides her maidservants in the huge garden, I was the only maidservant. So I blessed my body and bowed, saying, "I dare not." She smiled, raised her beautiful eyebrows, with a cold meaning, why don't you kneel down while apologizing? Your master has raised you to have a big temper." Just when I was about to speak, a voice sounded, "The princess blamed me so much, but I don't know if it's Jiu or His Royal Highness the 7th Princess of Qi." I turned around and saw Jiu walking over. He was dressed in purple, holding a folding fan in his hand, which was painted by the late eccentric Mo Qianqiu. There was an unfathomable smile in his beautiful phoenix eyes. The woman finally raised her head and looked at me with surprise in her eyes. She stood up slowly and walked in front of me. Slightly raised her chin, with a faint smile on the corner of her lips, she said casually, "So you are the new maidservant of Mr. Ji, who used to serve the 7th Princess of Qi. Then tell me, I will marry you." "She, who is more beautiful?" She stood in front of me so that I could see her beauty clearly. At that moment, I understood who she was, the Princess Yuzhuan of Fan Country Sucheng. Zhang Kekai, the 7th Princess of Qi State, Sucheng, Princess Yuzhuan of Fan State, and Mrs. Wei Qiuoxin are beauties with considerable reputations. It is rumored that Sucheng is a very arrogant and conceited woman, and her beauty and talent are worthy of such conceit. Such a woman probably cannot allow herself to be different from others. In all fairness, Suoteng is really beautiful, her face is as fair and delicate as porcelain carefully carved with a ruler, and her confident and aloof temperament from the inside out makes her look unattainable. So I smiled, and said lightly, "The 7th princess died when she was the most beautiful, and Her Royal Highness will grow old one day. But the beauty of the princess still exists in the world, and the beauty of the 7th princess has disappeared. How to compare have to." Su Cheng was silent for a while, hummed softly, and said, "You can really talk." His eyes turned to the fan in Ji Yu's hand, and he raised his beautiful eyes, a little surprised. Mo Qianqiu's painting. Dear Mountain Snow Removal Map. 3,000 taels of gold, I want your fan. Ji Yu hooked the corners of her mouth, as if laughing. This expression made Su Cheng a little unhappy. She pursed her lips and looked at Ji Yu, waiting for Ji Yu to bid. Ji Yu smiled and said, "Some people think Mo Kyunkai's paintings are priceless, while others think they are worthless. Buying paintings is originally for liking. If you insist on putting a price on it, it will be a disgrace to this liking." Su Cheng's eyes flickered, his expression became gentler, and he said lightly, "Young Master Ji is indeed out of the ordinary, then, how can you give up your love, young master?" He spoke a lot more politely, but he was still persistent and strong. Ji Yu's eyes fell on the gukkan on the stone table behind Su Cheng, and she smiled lightly. "I heard that the princess's piano is an antique, and the sound is excellent, and the princess can't put it down. Can I borrow Ji Yu to play it today?" Su Cheng turned his head to look at the gukkan behind him, then glanced at the fan in Ji Yu's hand, thought for a while, and agreed to Ji Yu. I resigned knowingly and left the garden quickly. When he was leaving, he heard two zither sounds, and Ji Yu's soft and watery voice, "The princess's Yang Chun Baixue just now is perfect in terms of fingering, but why is this relaxed and lively piece played so lonely?" When I looked, I saw the unconcealable surprise and an inexplicable emotion in Su Cheng's eyes. Zikao said that both Ling Shang and Changle's piano skills were taught by Ji Yu himself, but they are not as good as 70% of his own. After listening to their ensemble that day, such a wonderful piano sound is only 70% of Ji Yu's level. I think that in nearly 100 princes, no one's piano skills are higher than his. I think Ji Yu has achieved his goal. Su Teng, the owner of Yuzhuan County, has a special status in Fan Kingdom. She was originally the 11th daughter of the current King Fan. Because of an agreement between King Fan and Lord Guangcheng some years ago, Su Cheng was adopted by Lord Guangcheng's family to be raised by him since he was born. Mr. Guangcheng regards her as the apple of his eye, and King Fan loves Su Teng very much. Coupled with her talent and beauty, her status is actually higher than that of any princess in Fan Kingdom. With Su Cheng's help, even if the Prime Minister obstructs him in every possible way, Ji Yu will definitely be able to meet Fan Jun. Princess Yuzhuan is Yang Sheya's cousin. She was going to visit her aunt at home, and she was going to leave that day, but the old lady liked Su Cheng very much, so she forced Su Cheng not to let her go back. Su Cheng didn't want to save the old man's face, so he told Mr. Guangcheng to stay with the old lady for half a month. After 2 days, it will be the Fan Kingdom's festival. As usual, grand fireworks will be set off on the bank of Yuking Lake outside the palace, and the people in the entire Fan City can watch it. There is a viewing pavilion in the home mansion, where you can enjoy flowers in spring and the moon in autumn, and it is also an excellent place to watch fireworks. Ji Yu was invited to go to the pavilion to watch the fireworks together, and Xiaowan and I were by his side. On the way to the pavilion, I happened to meet Su Cheng and her maidservants. Su Cheng's eyes lit up when he saw Ji Yu, but his face was restrained very well, and he didn't show a very happy expression. Ji Yu just lowered her eyes and smiled and saluted, not courteous. The two walked side by side, chatting with each other, and the content was mostly rhythms that I knew nothing about. It can be seen that after a few days of getting along, Su Cheng admired Ji Yu's music theory attainments very much, and the look he looked at him was quite different from the initial arrogance. They both had excellent looks. When the two of them whispered from the side, it was like a painting, everything in the world was reduced to the background, only this beautiful couple remained. Young Master Ji and the princess are really a good match. The passing servant whispered. When I heard the words, I turned my head and met Xiaowan's eyes. She obviously heard the words, and we smiled at each other. Xiaowan is the maidservant who has followed Ji Yu for the longest time, so she should understand Ji Yu's long sleeves and good dancing skills the most. As long as Ji Yu is willing, who will he be unsuitable for? After boarding the pavilion, Su Teng was called by the old lady to accompany her. The old lady loved her very much and asked her to sit at the same table. Su Cheng then sat in the main seat in the middle, and Ji Yu was in the guest seat, and there was a considerable distance between them. When the fireworks first started, Su Cheng secretly looked at Ji Yu. Ji Yu was looking up at the fireworks. The gorgeous light flickered in his eyes, and the light and shadow intertwined on his side face like a picture scroll. Every inch of his brushwork was just right. Seemingly inspired, he turned his head to meet Su Cheng's gaze, then turned his head and smiled slightly. Su Cheng turned his head away in a little panic, and the roots of his ears turned red. This kind of secretive and ambiguous atmosphere is the most seductive. Ji Yu looked back with a smile, propped her elbows on the back of the chair, and rubbed her index finger and thumb lightly. He called me softly, Aji. I stepped forward and replied in a low voice, no. He turned his eyes to look at me and asked, why do you keep looking at me? I raised my eyes and bumped into his smiling Danfan eyes, thought for a while and said, because you are good looking. He was a little surprised, the phoenix eyes widened slightly, and at that moment a firework exploded by his ears, illuminating the air between us, illuminating his side face and eyes, and also illuminating our eyes in his eyes. Reflection. When the fireworks shattered, the piercing sound was like pouring a handful of water into a boiling oil pan, and it surged enthusiastically. Secret ambiguity is the most seductive. Better than fireworks. Fireworks are dead, how can they be compared to living people? This is my truth, I always knew he was good looking. He lowered his head and chuckled twice, leaning on the back of the chair and said slowly, you are very straightforward. You can speak so frankly and touchingly, it shows that you don't think so in your heart. Secret ambiguity is the most seductive, and it will be invalid if it is seen through. Most of the sincere feelings are difficult to express, just like Su Cheng turned away in a panic and said nothing. The more touching words you can say without thinking, the less sincere you are. He also understands this truth, so he can perform properly, and his words are touching, gentle, and moving. Ji Yu began to ask serious questions, is there anyone you suspect about what I told you? I said what I thought, and he raised his eyebrows slightly, interesting, but since he is someone close to Shaya, be careful when investigating, and don't act without conclusive evidence. I see. I stepped back and stood on the side, watching the fireworks in the sky. The nobles around me mingled with each other, and the common people outside the mansion looked up at each other with joy, and there was a warm and festive atmosphere everywhere. I looked at it aimlessly for a while, and then my eyes fell back on Ji Yu. He was still leaning on the back of the chair, sometimes watching the fireworks with a smile, and sometimes exchanging greetings with the nobles on both sides. My lord doesn't like fireworks. I asked Xiaowan. Xiaowan was stunned, why do you think so? She is 2 years older than Ji Yu, she is not considered a great beauty, but her brows and eyes are gentle, and she has dimples on her cheeks when she smiles. Among Ji Yu's maidservants, Xiaowan has the highest prestige, even the rebellious Chang Li listens to her. Young master seems to be avoiding fireworks a little bit. Although he disguised himself very well. I thought you wouldn't want to get to know young master. Xiaowan laughed, and she said, young master is a person who has gone through the flames of war, and I don't really like fireworks and firecrackers. I bowed my head and should be. I really don't care much about whether Ji Yu likes fireworks, I just happen to notice it. It just so happens that I don't like fireworks either. My biological mother passed away without a sound. At that time, it happened to be my father's birthday. He invited envoys from various countries to a grand banquet for 3 days, and set off fireworks for 3 consecutive nights. Every night I stood under the gorgeous fireworks and the enthusiastic drum music, and I didn't close my eyes for 3 days. Since then I have disliked fireworks. The next day there was a commotion in the Ho's mansion. It turned out that Mrs. Zhang lost her temper in the courtyard because she was not taken to the viewing platform, but the second lady suddenly fell into the water and was rescued ashore in a hurry. After being frightened, she developed a high fever. When the incident happened, Miss ER's nanny went to pick up the kite for her, and when she came back, Miss ER was struggling in the water. The second lady said that she was pushed down by someone, but she didn't see who it was. The nurse also said that when she left second miss, Only Mrs. Zhang and her personal maid were there, and there was no one else. The second young lady is the daughter of Princess Ziwan, Xiang Shei's only prostitute. The old lady is very precious. Now all kinds of evidence point to Mrs. Zhang. Mrs. Zhang was so panicked that she swore with tears that she left before the second lady fell into the water, but no one could testify except her personal maid. When I passed by the lobby, Mrs. Zhang was holding the old lady's hand and crying to defend herself. When she saw me from between the crowd, she stopped crying, pointed at me and said to the old lady, I left and this maid saw me when I was here, she can testify for me, I don't have time to go back and push Ian. I looked at her silently, and her maids pulled me over. Mrs. Zhang cried and put on her makeup and tried her best to put on a kind and comforting demeanor, and said to me, "You are Mr. Jiu's maid, aren't you? You and the old lady tell me, just tell the truth, Shen Shi, did you see me coming out of the garden?" I passed by the garden at that time, and I did see her angrily leading her maids out. I looked at her eyes full of hope, pretended to be terrified and whispered, "What is Mrs. Zhang talking about? I have never seen you before." Mrs. Zhang was stunned for a moment, unable to maintain that kind fake face any longer. She pushed me hard and pointed at me trembling with anger, why did you take advantage of others to slander me like this?" The old lady coughed twice impatiently, and with a rare serious tone, she scolded Mrs. Zhang. Mrs. Zhang grabbed my arm so hard that it was about to bleed, but finally let go of her hand unwillingly, and stared at me resentfully. I loosened my arms, said excuse me and backed away. The second lady was still ill, so the old lady finally ordered Mrs. Zhang to be locked up and wait for the second lady to recover before making a decision. The old lady in the backyard of the Ho's mansion said one thing, no matter how much Mrs. Zhang cried, she was still locked up. Zhang's maid came to me afterwards, with the same arrogant expression as Zhang's. She swung her hand and was about to slap me, but was stopped by Mo Xiao who was beside me at that time. Mo Xiao cast a cold glance at the servant girl, and said, "Young Master Jiu's maid can only be touched by the young master, so what kind of thing are you?" The servant girl bit her lip, pointed at me and said, "Why don't you tell the truth? You have hurt our little lady so much, you will have retribution." Before I could say anything, Mo Xiao retorted, "If you really believe in retribution, why don't you believe that what happened to your little lady is the retribution of heaven? Why did you want to stop it?" Xiaowan had said before that Mo Xiao was the most eloquent of all the maidservants, and now it seems that she is so. She used to hate me so much, but now she will stand up for me, which surprised me a little. The servant girl was so angry that she couldn't speak to Mo Xiao. "Who on earth wanted you to harm our little lady? It's the Chu family, isn't it?" Mo Xiao looked at me, I shook my head and approached the maid, looked at her apologetically and said, "Sister, I'm afraid I made a mistake, or I was distracted at the time. I really don't remember clearly, what happened when the little lady pulled me over. If you're nervous, you can't even remember. I'm Mr. Jiu's maidservant, how can I have any reason to kill your little lady?" I smiled, but there was nothing in my heart. When the maid came back half believing and half doubting, I turned around and thanked Mo Xiao for blocking that slap for me. Mo Xiao crossed her arms and waved her hands impatiently, "Who told you to be so slow? I'm afraid she'll make you foolish with her left and right bows." After a pause, she looked at me for a while and said meaningfully, "However, you're good at acting." "What? Your sincere and guilty look, I believe you." She turned her head and smiled, "You always have such an indifferent expression, sometimes I am really curious, will you bleed if you get a needle? It won't hurt." Her gaze was half mocking, half curious. I smiled and replied, "I am also a human being, so naturally it will hurt." After parting with Mo Xiao, I went to find Ziai Chen. He was a little surprised when he saw me, and asked with a smile if there was any progress and if there was anything he could help with. I looked at him and said, "The relationship between Mrs. Chu and Lord Ho is not as good as it seems." Zikan raised his eyebrows, looked at me and said nothing. It seems that Xiang Shaya loves the Chu family, but the Chu family is a bit indifferent. Yesterday, Xiang Shaya also brought Chu to the viewing tower instead of Zhang. Under the fireworks, the Chu family frequently looked at Xiang Shaya. If Xiang Shaya has changed, the meaning of the head immediately looked away again. It's a pity that Xiang Shaya didn't look at Chu family many times during the whole process. An arrogant woman like the Chu family doesn't even disdain her children, but she shows humble feelings towards Xiang Shaya. The Chu family likes General Xiang, but the general doesn't like the Chu family. Therefore, the Chu family is resentful and indifferent, and the general is ashamed and courteous. Although Zikan didn't answer me, the answer was obvious. I smiled slightly, looked into his eyes and said, "Maidservant, can I ask you to help me find someone?" Xiaowan once told me that all 8 of them know martial arts, and Mo Xiao and Nansu's Kung Fu is the best, especially Nansu's lightness Kung Fu. When I called Nansu to stop, a trace of surprise flashed in her eyes, and she stood still hesitantly. She is not a talkative person, and I usually don't take the initiative to find someone to talk to. This seems to be the first time I have talked to her. When she looked into my eyes, she naturally looked down on me, but she was more curious. I asked her for help. She was a little hesitant, but she quickly agreed after hearing me that it was in the office. Just when I was about to say goodbye, she stopped me and said with some hesitation, "Well, how do you know I'm Nansu?" It seems that Mo Xiao also asked me this question. I thought about it, and said with a smile, "I can tell you, but you can't tell your sister Mo Xiao, how about it?" She bit her lip, and finally shook her head, "Forget it." Then she turned and left. Sure enough, the relationship between Mo Xiao and Nansu was too good to hide, and Nansu was a very honest girl. It's nice to have loved ones you can trust with all your heart. Sometimes I think about my period, and I don't know if I'm doing well without her. In half a month, the relationship between Su Cheng and Ji Yu became more and more intimate. Su Cheng was there almost every time I served Ji Yu. Everyone in the world knows that Zhou is the source of etiquette. The Zhou royal family pays attention to etiquette and etiquette. Today's Zhou Tianzi is also a gentleman and benevolent ruler who sets an example for all countries. Ji Yu was born in the Zhou royal family. On weekdays, he travels around the world, and he has local customs, legends, and stories at his fingertips. Su Cheng always focuses on him when he talks, and love slowly overflows from his eyes. I looked at them and thought that maybe when girls fall in love with someone, they will always become extra soft, even if they are as proud as Su Teng. At the same time, Zikan found out that he Xin, the maidservant of the Chu family, had an affair with the guard of the Prime Minister's family, and obtained the letter evidence that he Xin leaked news about the Haofu to the guard. But he Xin was only willing to admit that he had an affair with the guards of the Prime Minister's mansion, and refused to admit that he leaked news about the home mansion to the Prime Minister's mansion. She cried and hugged Chu's leg, and intermittently said that she just fell in love with someone, and didn't care about his identity and background, and she never secretly gave him news from the waiter's mansion. Chu's face was unbearable at first, and she burst into tears after hearing He Xin's words. She held He Xin and looked at Xiang Shaya with red eyes, and said, "I believe in He Xin." Chu's is also a temperamental person, and it's too late for someone else to get rid of the relationship at this moment, but she stands up to protect He Xin. Xiang Shaya frowned and told Chu Shi not to mess around, but somehow he poked Chu Shi's sore spot. She shouted, "I've been messing around with you for many years, I really don't want to mess around anymore, let Zi Chen accompany you." As soon as these words were meaningful, Xiang Shaya's face immediately turned pale, and Zi Chen didn't speak. Chu knew she had made a slip of the tongue but didn't want to care about it. She turned her head and cried with her heart in her arms. Fortunately, in order not to disturb the old lady, this was a secret confrontation. Only Xiang Shaya, Ji Yu, me, Zikan Chu and He Xin participated, and the scene was not too ugly. Due to Chu's begging Xiang Shaya to lock up He Xian first, he thanked Ji for helping him find the traitor and left. Zi Chen escorted me back to my room. Her expression was not very good either. He told me not to publicize what I heard today. I looked at him and said with a smile, I guessed it a long time ago, the relationship between you and the general. Both your parents died when you were 10 years old, and you were sold into the Ho's mansion by your aunt. Since then, you have always been with Lord Ho. At that time, my wife had not passed away. I heard that she didn't like you, but Lord Ho always protected you. When you were 14, Lord Ho took you to the battlefield. When you were 16, you led Kinki thousands of miles to rescue Lord Ho in distress. From then on, Lord Ho trusted you very much and was inseparable from you. After a pause, I said, on the Guanjing Pavilion, every time the fireworks are held, Master Ho will be the first to look at you. If you laugh, he will laugh too. For a person like Master Ho, raising a prostitute Tong is really nothing, but he used the Chu family as a cover to hide it for you, which shows that he is very attentive to you. In this way, the Chu family's jealousy and resentment towards you, and the general's extraordinary love for you have all explained. Zikan stopped in his tracks and listened to my words, his eyes slowly dimmed from surprise, and those eyes that were always bright and energetic became bottomless. At the end, he smiled and said, Master Jiu's maidservant is really powerful. I also looked at him with a smile, that's why you are deliberately trying to exclude me from the investigation. I do not understand what you mean. I would pass by the garden every day during the application process. On that day, I met Mrs. Zhang and the second lady fell into the water at the same time. I became the only witness of Mrs. Zhang. If I really testified for Mrs. Zhang would be eager to see me again. After a few days of making a fuss, Master Ho has a dispassionate temperament and hates house fights the most. I was involved in house fights, and even if I want to come, Master Ho doesn't want me to participate in the investigation. In this way, you can investigate alone and then charge the person you want to be charged with. It's on, isn't it? I said slowly. I have almost never been valued this much, and I was even a little flattered to realize that this bureau was targeting me. In order to avoid further incidents, I went straight to Zikan and pretended that my suspicion was someone else, so that he could relax his vigilance. Zikan looked at me silently. The moonlight was a bit groggy today. He stood in the darkness and was shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere. I looked at him like this and smiled slightly. You don't have to be so nervous, I know you are the real traitor. Didn't I also see you make a scapegoat? What did I say from the beginning to the end? You don't have to think about it. Kill me to silence, young Master Ji also knows. He said coldly, don't slander me, do you have evidence? I asked someone to follow you, and she saw that you handed over the forged letter evidence to the guards of the Prime Minister's mansion. One-sided words. Oh. I walked 2 steps into him and looked into his cloudy eyes. Then do you think Lord Ho believes in Mr. Jiu or in you? Do you dare to bet? Can you afford to lose? There was silence between us for a moment, and there was no sound in the empty corridor. He was no longer the bright and innocent young man, and he was terrifyingly deep. If Zi Cao saw Zi Chen like this, he would be very sad. What do you want? He finally said, don't expose it to Lord Ho but negotiate with me. What do you want to do? For my son and I, it doesn't matter who is the real traitor, as long as it works, it's good. We didn't detain you on the spot and got all the stolen goods to show our sincerity. Why don't we make a deal? I looked at Zikan and smiled slightly. Zikao was really sad when she found out Zikan's real identity. She lay on the bed and cried for a long time, sobbing and almost out of breath. I sat on the edge of the bed and patted her on the back to help her breathe. In fact, she didn't say a few words to Zikan, and she had longing for him purely based on a kind of fantasy. Xiaowan told me that Zikao is often like this. She is easy to fall in love with one side but forgets it quickly. Before long, she might not even remember who Zikan was. Such a child, I don't know whether it is affectionate or ruthless. Xiaowan said so. So Zikan agreed. She asked while sniffling. She finally accepted the fact that Zikan was Lord Ho's lover, and began to ask the following things. I patted her on the back and said slowly, he has no other choice. Then he is not very loyal to the Prime Minister. He concealed his identity and entered the Marquis's mansion since he was a child, so he doesn't have much affection for the Prime Minister's mansion. He didn't betray the Prime Minister because his family is still in the hands of the Prime Minister, and secondly, he likes Lord Ho too much. Zikao raised her teary eyes and looked at me suspiciously. He likes Lord Ho? Then he's still been a spy, so he should confess earlier. I patted her on the head and said with a smile, no. This is also Zikan's sadness. If he had no love for Xiang Shaya and confessed to Xiang Shaya earlier, with Xiang Shaya's demeanor and his life-saving grace to Xiang Shaya would probably help him save his family. At the same time, regardless of previous suspicions, he still kept him by his side. It's a pity that he likes Xiang Shaya. The closer the relationship is, the less room for deceit and concealment. He had lied to Xiang Shaya, and if he confessed now, even if he saved his life, he would not be able to continue to be Xiang Shaya's lover. He was not willing to lose Xiang Shaya. This was Ziai Chen's dead end. The more he dared not confess, he had to do more things for the Prime Minister, and the accumulated deceit made it even more difficult for him to confess. Before I caught Xin, I told Gu about the investigation of Ziai Chen, so Gu decided to follow the trend to push Xin out first, and then try to threaten and lure Ziai Chen. At that time, he said with a leisurely smile, be careful and suspicious. If you want him to help you, you must give him the conditions that will most impress him. For Zikan, that condition was Xiang Shaya. So when I agreed to help rescue his family and concealed his identity from Xiang Shaya, his eyes lit up despite hesitation. This is an offer he cannot refuse. Zikao sighed faintly after hearing this. She turned over and lay on the bed and whispered, now I think, sister, what you said is very reasonable. What? It's good to have no one you like, otherwise you will be sad and in a dilemma, just like Ziai Chen. I laughed. Zikao sighed for a while, then looked at me. Sister Azi, your former sweetheart, why do you like him? My sweetheart? I was startled, and then chuckled. Actually, it's nothing special. It's just that I met him when I was a child. He told me a story for 3 days and taught me to sing a tune. That was really a long time ago. When my biological mother passed away, it happened to be a big banquet for my father's birthday. The palace was busy and no one cared about my whereabouts. When I was wandering around, I met him. His name was A Yao. He was a piano boy brought by the guests. He got lost in the backyard with a gherkin that was taller than a person. I didn't say who I was, just told him my biological mother had passed away and he was very sad for me. He asked me why I wasn't sad, and I said because I couldn't. The birthday banquet of the lord of a country is auspicious, and bad luck is the most taboo, so my mother forbids me to cry. He put the piano down and asked me if I wanted to listen to the music. My mother liked the song Dao Ao very much, and I asked him to teach me how to sing it. I was born with tone deafness, and I learned such a simple song for 3 days in a row. In my 20 years of life, I have only learned such a song. Maybe it is, no one is as patient and meticulous as him, correcting each sound over and over again, and he doesn't dislike my stupidity. Zikao looked at me as if she was waiting for the continuation of my a long time ago. I thought about it and said, maybe before him, no one was so gentle to me, and no one praised me well. Even my biological mother never praised me. She was originally an actress. She came from a humble background but she has some talents, but I can't teach her how to do it. She has an optimistic and unrestrained temperament, but she doesn't scold me but often laughs at me. As time went by, I recalled that she was really a nice person, and she also loved me. About being a first-time mother and not quite knowing how to do it well. I don't know that even a dull person like me wants to be praised. Zikao's eyes lit up, and she didn't know what it was associated with, and she looked longingly. Ah, gentle, I also like gentle men. He is so gentle to you, he must like you. I couldn't help laughing, a little loudly. She pouted and looked at me. I said, he is a gentle person, he will be gentle to everyone, not because I have anything special. What's so special about me? Probably because it was very dull and weird. After learning a song for 3 days, my mother didn't cry when she died, but she cried when she finally learned Dao. Zikao didn't hear the lingering love story she wanted to hear, so she moaned dissatisfied. I lay on the bed and looked up at the ceiling. Many long memories came and went in my mind. In fact, I often think of him, even if it was 14 years ago. During those 3 days, he would come to accompany me during the day, and at night he was going to help play music at the banquet, and I sat in the courtyard, watching the fireworks while waiting for him. When he was not playing the piano, he would tell me stories, many stories, the huge world outside the palace city, hundreds of vassal kingdoms, the mythical south and north, the end of the world. When I met him, I realized how big the world is. As for the song Dao, after I knew how to sing it, Yeo smiled and praised me for singing well, but when I saw his bright smiling eyes, I burst into tears. When my mother passed away, I didn't know what else to do for her. I wasn't even sad, at most I was at a loss. At that time, I suddenly thought that it would be great if I could learn this piece earlier, so that I could sing it to her before she died. She likes this song very much, she must be very happy. Maybe she will smile and bend her eyes, and praise me for singing well. Smiling softly like him, complimenting me on a job well done. I suddenly felt very uncomfortable. I don't know what is the meaning of living, obviously no one in this world loves me anymore. Yao comforted me and said, love yourself well, isn't there someone who loves you in this world? To you, you are the most precious person in the world. I looked up at him, his smile was bright and gentle. That seemed to be the first time, the only time, someone told me that I was valuable. Later, I followed what he said, love myself the most in this world, and live only loving myself. When I was young, I was lonely and afraid countless times, or when I was desperate, I always thought of his words, thinking that if I died, no one in this world would remember me, so I persisted like this. I only saw this man for 3 days, but I remembered him for 14 years. Where is he? Is he still alive? Is he doing well? If he sees me now, he will be very disappointed. The girl he had treated tenderly out of kindness hadn't become a kind person like him. But he probably doesn't remember me anymore. But, Sister Azzy. Zikao finished moaning, turned around and lay down next to my pillow, looked at me and said, Sister, your eyes are different when you talk about that person. You must like it very much. It's nice to have a sweetheart. I rubbed her head with a smile and said softly, go to sleep. The king of the Fan Kingdom is old, obsessed with asking immortals and not paying attention to state affairs. The Prime Minister recommended an immortal to the monarch, and the monarch listened to the immortal's words for treatment whenever he was ill. Before Gu came, the monarch was unwell, and the immortal said that the monarch's fate was fire and that he should not meet with people whose fate was in conflict. Gu's birth date is water, so she was naturally excluded from the monarch's guests. Su Cheng often went to see Fan Jun, and it didn't take long for the immortal to offend Su Cheng and make Fan Jun angry. At this time, evidence of his corruption and donations and disrespect to the monarch surfaced, and Fan Jun was furious. The fairies had even angered the Prime Minister. I don't know how Gu did it. After threatening Zi Chen, I handed him over to Gu. Presumably he provided Gu with a lot of evidence against the immortal. Gu carefully selected a few, with Su Cheng as the trigger point of the crack, and arranged them one by one, so that they could achieve the best effect after being triggered. As a result, Gu can finally meet Fan Jun. Xia Wan, Ling Shang, and I worked together to arrange the clothes for Ji to meet the monarch. Xia Wan took out the clothes from the box and spread them on the table. Ling Shang took a copper pot filled with boiling water and ironed them. Wrinkles in clothes. I've always been extremely flustered and clumsy about such things, and I'm lucky not to ruin my clothes. Fortunately, Xia Wan asked me to boil the water and didn't let me do more detailed work. Ling Shang has a hot temper and is a good hand at work. She has quick hands and feet, but she does things very appropriately. She takes care of Jiu's daily life in every possible way. My lord meets you, can you go with me? Xia Wan asked me while tidying up. I fanned the small stove, heard the words and replied, young master ordered me to accompany you. Young master's lobbying is the most exciting. Before someone argued with you in court, 8 people didn't say that you are alone, and there are others who were choked. I laughed so hard. Anyway, Aji will find out tomorrow. Ling Shang went to get the clothes from the closet, and just as he finished speaking, he answered a small exclamation, oh, there are still some small clothes here. You opened the wrong box, it's on the other side. Xia Wan walked over and pointed to a box next to her. Ling Chong looked at those little clothes for a long time, and laughed happily, is this the clothes you wore when you were young, Miss Wan, is it your collection? Xia Wan didn't deny it either, she turned her head and smiled, he grows up too fast every year, I'm afraid I'll forget what he looked like when he was young. Ling Shang sighed twice, and said with a smile, it's a pity that I came late, the young master is already the young master Pian Pian. It's good to come late. How can you bear your temper when you suffered those things in the early years? Xia Wan looked at me as she spoke, I looked at them and concentrated on fanning the small stove. Xia Wan put those little clothes away and closed the lid of the box, and sighed, he has really changed a lot these years. Ling Shang and Xia Wan said a few more words, then she took her clothes and came over, she stopped in surprise when she passed me, Aji, are you feeling unwell? Why are you shaking? I straightened up and stretched my muscles and bones, after squatting for a long time, my body is numb. I didn't do much work that day, but I felt very tired. Even though I was so tired, I couldn't fall asleep early at night. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling, listening to Zikao's steady breathing until the east gradually turned white. When it was almost dawn, I finally fell into a dream in a daze, and in the dream I saw a Yao. I haven't dreamed about him in years. He was still standing in front of me as he was 14 years ago, wearing a goose yellow dress and holding a chin that was taller than him. He was good looking and even better when he smiled, with a pair of clear amber eyes. He was 2 steps away from me, I took a step forward but he took a step back. He said to me I'm sorry. I don't know why he said sorry. He just looked at me warmly and sadly, and never said a word. The dream came to an abrupt end here. When I woke up, Zikao called my name. She said I was shaking and she was a little worried about me. Did you have a nightmare? She asked me. I nodded, thought about it but suddenly laughed. I patted Zikao on the shoulder and said, it's been so many years, and there's still something in this world that can scare me. Dreams are just dreams, don't be afraid. Zikao said firmly. I looked into her eyes and smiled, yet. Today, Chang'e, Mo Zionansu, and I accompanied Ji to meet Fan Jun. He was dressed elegantly and smiled appropriately, both modest and majestic. Fan Jun is a bit lazy, it is rumored that he is not interested in political affairs, it seems to be true. After the 2 parties exchanged greetings and sat down, Fan Jun leaned on the back of the gold silk chair and said slowly, I have heard for a long time that the young master has a wonderful strategy, so I will listen to it. Ji saluted and said with a smile, I don't dare to do strange strategies, but there is a recipe for longevity, which I dedicate to your majesty. Fan Jun's eyes lit up as soon as he heard longevity, and he sat upright, no longer in a lazy posture, and said eagerly, Sir, please tell me. I saw the smile in Jiu's eyes, Fan Jun was hooked. To be known as the #1 lobbyist in the world, Gu has his own skills. He said that Yu Guo had captured a 1,000-year-old tortoise when he founded the country, and it has been enshrined to this day, so the king of Yu state has always lived a long life. It may be disrespectful to the gods to rob the gods by force, but if Fan Guo can save the rest of the country from fire and water, it is logical to ask them to offer this gods. The Prime Minister advocated that this year's Fan state had a flood and the harvest was not good. At this time, going to war is a waste of people and money, so we should recharge our batteries. Ji Yudao said that the state of Wu was arrogant, so there would be no time for Fan to recharge his batteries. At that time, he captured Yu and gained Yu's granary, so he would inevitably attack the neighboring Fan, and it would be too late to fight again. Just like crossing a river, the enemy is at its weakest when it is in the river, and it is easy to win by attacking. The enemy has already crossed the river and comes to form an array, the most imposing, and it is too late to send troops. The Prime Minister also said that the army of Wu and Zhao was so powerful that even if Fan Guo helped Yu, they would not be able to win. Ji Yu retorted that although the army of Wu and Zhao was aggressive, it was a different dream in the same bed. If the alliance between the two countries could be broken, victory would be easy. I saw him state the pros and cons of his situation in a few words, and lightly seduce people's hearts. When those strategies and situations came out of his mouth, it was like a fruit wrapped in honey and turned into an attractive candied fruit. Fan Jun's emotional changes were completely under his control. Every time he frowned and every time he laughed, he responded in his own way. He attacked the city and plundered the land like this, watching Fan Jun being moved by his words step by step. Lobbyist, attack the heart first. His delicate words drifted through my mind without leaving any weight. I just looked at him carefully, looked at his eyes, bridge of nose, lips, jawline, and listened to his rising and sometimes low-ending voice. All the strange and familiar details. Perhaps because of too little sleep, my thinking became difficult and sluggish. These fragmented images are entangled in my mind, and I seem to be running on a dark road until the end of the road. After nearly 2 hours of debate, Gu won a complete victory. Fan Jun agreed to send troops and gave him a large reward, which he accepted with a smile. The Prime Minister looked down and bowed to leave. Fan Jun Kaiuxian asked that in all these years, the Prime Minister has always presided over the government affairs. In the past few years, Fan Jun spent an unknown amount of money on celestial medicine and immortal art, until the Prime Minister recommended immortals to Fan Jun, and Fan Jun restrained himself a bit. Although the Prime Minister said he was being arbitrary, he did his best. Although he had a quarrel with the Ho's mansion, he did not target Xiang Shaya in the matter of sending troops. Flooding is serious in Fan country this year, the Prime Minister knows the benefits best, and sending troops to the rest of the country is like a gamble on the fate of the country. He doesn't want to gamble. When we went out with Gu, Su Cheng was already waiting at the door. She said a few words to Gu, her eyes could not stop smiling. What a poor girl, I thought. When I returned to the home mansion, I ran into Zi Chen. He is a busy man, and we have rarely seen each other since the conversation that debunked his identity. This time we met on the corridor in the garden. After he was stunned for a moment, he laughed, his expression as usual, Miss Aji. Still looks like a clean and sunny boy. So I also nodded. We were on the same road, and after walking together for a while, he suddenly looked at me, "Can I ask you a question?" His tone is relaxed. I turned to look at him and motioned for him to continue. "Since when did you start to doubt me?" He had indeed behaved harmlessly to humans and animals from the very beginning. Master Xiang suspected that the inner ghost was a permanent resident of the mansion, and he also removed most of the suspicion for him. Logically, no matter how suspicious he was, it should not be on him. I thought about it and replied, "From the very beginning, when you first spoke to me." He raised his eyebrows, "Young Master Gu's dust cleaning banquet." "Yes." "Why?" I turned around and looked into his eyes, and smiled slightly, "You take the initiative to talk to me and are very curious about me, so I think you are not ordinary. In the eyes of ordinary people, I am nothing more than an ordinary woman. There are many people who meet me and don't remember what I look like, and even more people who talk to me many times and don't remember who I am. No one will take the initiative to put your mind on me. In my short 21-year life, the people who can notice me at a glance are all my kind." He was a little puzzled, but he quickly stretched his brows and said with a smile, "It's so." I was silent for a moment, then asked, "Can I ask you a question too?" He nodded, "You say." I stood facing him in the middle of the garden, looking into his eyes. "Why do you like Lord Xiang?" He was a little surprised, his face turned pale at first, and then gradually turned red. "It is very green and beautiful in the background of a fiery red maple leaf." I admired the change in his face. I thought he was good at pretending to be deep-minded, but I forgot that he was only 17 years old. It turns out that love is something that cannot be hidden, even for a small work. I think Xiang Shaya came here because he knew that Zikan admired him, so he never had any doubts. "I've already answered your question." Seeing he hesitated, I said. He lowered his eyes, thinking of something, and smiled softly, "Miss Aji, I entered the mansion at the age of 6, and I didn't know that my parents were alive and in the hands of the Prime Minister until I was 10. At the beginning, I was real." He looked up at me with sad and helpless eyes. "I've been by his side for 11 years, and the girl can see what kind of person he is. Such an excellent person belongs to me and treats me well. How could I not like him?" I was silent. Xiang Shaya is bold and handsome, and his uprightness is rare among the nobles I have met. Such a person is willing to make an exception for Zikan, and let down his beloved little wife for Zikan, so Zikan is naturally moved. I asked, "Even if you are the same man as him, even if you are a secret agent?" "Yes." His answer was firm. "No matter what I am, I should like him very much." I looked at him, looking at the bright and sad eyes in the autumn. I felt that my running on that dark road finally hit the wall, my head was bloody, painful but awake. "I've got to find out if it's true." The next morning, I went to help Xiaowan organize her clothes, folding those complicated clothes one by one. Xiaowan smiled lightly and said, "Fortunately, my son is thinner, otherwise what would the layers of clothes look like?" Thinking of Fan Zhen's bloated body like a ball, I couldn't help but smile. Xiaowan said, "I finally saw you smiling, you have been absent-minded all day." "I didn't get a good rest last night." Ziai Cao ground her teeth. "Not at all. It's the sunny season recently, so I suggest drying the clothes before putting them in the box." Xiaowan agreed, and then opened each clothes box to find the clothes that needed to be dried, including the small box that put Jiyu's childhood clothes. I looked at the clothes in the box and asked Xiaowan, "Why is there a stain here?" Xiaowan leaned over, looked at the brown spots on the fabric, thought for a while, and said, "I'm afraid it's mud stains, and I can't wash it clean. This is the one I liked the most when I was young, so I put it away." This stained dress was a light yellow long-sleeved gown with no special embroidery patterns, and it looked like a 10-year-old child's clothes. There is also a corresponding belt on the side. I picked up the belt, with Zhou's words embroidered on it, and I asked Xiaowan, "What is it embroidered on?" Xiaowan glanced at it, and replied, "This is Zhou's writing. It is embroidered with the young master's nickname." My hand holding the belt tightened slightly, and I heard Xiaowan's voice drifting past my ears. "The one embroidered is the young master's nickname, A Yao. A Yao. The young master's nickname is A Yao. Gu, A Yao." Sure enough, I saw the dress right. I remembered it when I saw Ling Shang take it out of the box the day before yesterday. I actually remembered everything about him clearly, and recognized him at a glance after 14 years. Only he, I did not recognize. I have come to seek proof, and I have also obtained my proof. There is no way to retreat when the picture is poor. I put the belt back into the box and heard my own voice, still calm and calm. Is this dress still drying? Show it off. I don't know how to get this stain off, but it's not conspicuous. I know, it rained lightly on one of those 3 days, and stains splashed on his body. I took out the clothes and closed the box. When the box fell, it made a dull sound, like a long sigh. The only fortunate thing is that no one except me knows that he is my Yao. Even he himself doesn't remember. Gu called me early the next morning, and he gave me a small box full of treasures bestowed by Fan Jun, saying that I had rewarded me for my great contribution this time. In addition, he also gave me a jade pendant, carved into a hollow crescent shape, embellished with silver threads. The jade is very transparent azure, and the color is very good. Don't you like azure color very much? When I first saw this piece of jade, I thought it was very suitable for you, so I gave it to a craftsman in Fan Kingdom to make a jade pendant. I just got it back today. He looked at me in the morning light and smiled. There is no intention of asking for credit, as if this is a normal thing. I looked at the jade pendant and remembered what Zikao had said to me. Why don't you love the sun? It is indeed the color I like, the style I like, the texture I like, and it is the jade pendant that suits me very well. It can be seen that he chose this gift carefully, and it is naturally heartwarming, even flattered, to be placed in such a person's heart. Thinking about it, Su Cheng did the same, thinking that Gu treated her differently. It's a pity that he treats everyone like this, whether it's a strategy or a habit. It can only show that there is nothing special about who is in his heart. I accepted the jade pendant and saluted to thank you. Gu said, put your things away and go to the west wing. I raised my eyes to look at him, and he flicked his purple sleeves, and said, this game has finally come to an end, and you have participated in half, why don't you take a look? So half an hour later, Gu and I went to the west wing room. At this time, Ziai Chen and Xiang Shaya were already standing in the room. Xiang Shaya's eyes were red with anger, while Ziai Chen's face was pale and he knelt on the ground. When we walked in, Ziai Chen raised his eyes and stared at Gu, full of resentment. Gu acted as if she hadn't seen him, and sat down after exchanging greetings with Xiang Shaya. Zikan was no longer useful to Gu, so it was time for a showdown. Gu seems to have a mysterious intelligence network in his hands. Before cooperating with Ziai Chen, he investigated Ziai Chen, and soon found out that Ziai Chen's parents and relatives were in the hands of the Prime Minister, but they all died 2 years ago. Afterwards, those who corresponded with Zikan were ghostwriters who imitated their handwriting. The Prime Minister lied to him. But Gu didn't tell Zikan the truth, but asked the ghostwriter to write 2 letters, pretending to have contact with his parents, and continued to use him. Gu promised that Ziai Chen would not tell Xiang Shaya his identity, and Xiang Shaya did not know about it at the beginning. After the immortal fell, Gu told Ziai Chen's real identity when he went to the military camp. Xiang Shaya, and told him not to make any noise. At that time, Zikan stayed in the home mansion and did not follow Xiang Shaya, so naturally he had no way of knowing. Xiang Shaya returned home today to settle everything. What's sad is that the evidence Gu left behind during Zikan's cooperation during this period can just prove his identity as a secret agent. From the beginning to the end, Zikan was completely deceived and used completely. Gu and I are not without flaws, but it's a pity that he really wants to get rid of the Prime Minister and stay by Xiang Shaya's side forever, so that he ignores those flaws. I looked at Ziai Chen, there were red fingerprints on his face. He must have been hit by Xiang Shaya, his eyes were full of panic and stubbornness, he was holding the corner of his clothes so hard that his fingertips turned white. Are you really a spy? Xiang Shaya was already trembling with anger. Zikan gritted his teeth, leaned on the ground and said, yes. Xiang Shaya laughed back angrily. He pointed at Ziai Chen and said, okay, you Ziai Chen, you lied to me for 11 years. Back then when you rescued me from the chaos, it was also to gain my trust. No. I was sincere at that time, Lord Ho, I. Zikan raised his head, his eyes turned red in a panic, but as if he didn't know what to say, he just repeated, I am sincerely, truly. Sincerely? While being sincere to me, at the same time reveal the news about me to the Prime Minister. Xiang Shaya laughed and said, your sincerity is cheap. Zikan walked a few steps to Xiang Shaya's side, he took Xiang Shaya's hand, and tried to speak fluently, Master Ho, I thought my family was in the hands of the Prime Minister. I helped Mr. Gu this time for the sake of get rid of the Prime Minister's control, I want to be with you, General. Xiang Shaya fell silent, maybe he was touched by something in Ziai Chen's words, he turned sideways to us, unable to see his expression clearly. Gu took a sip of tea and said calmly, the general asked me to testify. Now that he has fully confessed, there is nothing else to say. The condition he wants is indeed to save his family and not let you know. What you think is up to you to judge. Xiang Shaya was silent, turned around and looked down at Ziai Chen's eyes, you just said you were with me, what are you together for? Zikan looked at him with his neck up, his high ponytail hanging down to the ground, his turbulent eyes were full of hope and confusion. He watched Xiang Shaya take his hand away from his, and looked at Xiang Shaya in a daze, his eyes almost pleading. What are you, and you deserve it? Xiang Shaya said, smashing the hope in Ziai Chen's eyes. As if he didn't understand, his pupils dilated slightly, and he stared blankly at Xiang Shaya. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. When Xiang Shaya asked someone to lock him up, Zikan still lost his soul and didn't even resist. He just said softly when he was pulled up, so you are fake too. Xiang Shaya didn't answer, maybe he didn't hear it. Zikan lied as a spy, but he really liked Xiang Shaya. What is Zikan to Xiang Shaya? Just a plaything he can care for. It was Xiang Shaya who was bold, and that boldness was for nobles of his rank, not for a servant. Which of the nobles in this world is not like this? Zikan was deceived by everyone, and finally by the one he loved. How pathetic he is! After Zikan was taken down, Jiu and Xiang Shaya left after saying a few words, and I walked behind him in the courtyard. The boy was still standing in front of me 2 days ago, sadly but firmly saying that he liked his master very much, and I already knew the fate he was about to face. But that's how I watched him go to this tragedy. Do you feel sorry for him? Jiu suddenly turned her head and said to me. The instigator had been smiling all the time, and he wasn't even half ashamed. I thought about it and replied, poor. Do you think I should keep my promise and fulfill him? There is no impenetrable wall in the world. If you fulfill Zikan's wish, and Lord Xiang finds out Zikan's true identity in the future, Zikan will definitely bring up this matter to redeem his merits. And Lord Ho knows that you have been with Zikan. There is no guarantee that you will not feel bad for you if you cooperate to hide it from him. Considering your interests, it is natural to betray Zikan at this moment. I looked into his eyes and said lightly, you are not a kind person, so naturally you will not put the happiness of others first. Jiu's eyes sank slightly, and he said with a half smile, aren't you a good person? When he was like this, he probably had an incomprehensible and scary atmosphere, but I didn't avoid his gaze and asked, are you a good person? He seemed to think about it for a while, and then smiled, of course not, but you have said too many high-sounding and hypocritical words, and your straightforward evil words make people not used to it. I lowered my eyes and smiled. He didn't say anything else, turned around and walked forward. I followed him, and there was a faint scent of cypress on his body, which stretched all the way. In the past, A Yao didn't smoke incense. A Yao was the kindest person in the past. There is no similarity between him and A Yao. 10 days after Jiu met Fan Jun, Su Cheng came to Xiang Shaya's residence one evening and went straight to Jiu. At that time, Jiu was teaching me how to play chess. When I heard that Su Cheng was visiting, I hid behind the screen. Almost as soon as I got behind the screen, I heard Su Cheng walk in. She likes music, and always carries jade bis on her body, and there is a crisp sound when the jade bis collide while walking. Normally, the sound was calm and pleasant, but today it was out of rhythm and full of noise. I heard her hastily salute, and sat beside Ji-yu. "Let's elope," she said. There was a lamp between Ji-yu and her. Through the silk screen, I saw Su Cheng's blurred side face reflected by the flickering light, which was blurry but also beautiful. When we first met, she raised her chin high and asked me who was more beautiful, she or Kikai. Now she is holding Ji-yu's hand, trembling and saying humbly, "Let's elope." Ji-yuan said, "Why did the princess make such a statement?" "Father wants to betroth me to the eldest son of Wei Guo," he said. "Fangguo wants to send troops to aid the rest, so he needs to use the way of Wei Guo. Wei Guo is strong, I don't understand much about it. Anyway, no matter what I say, you must let me marry that person." It was rare for Su Cheng to be so flustered and sad, and his tone was unstable. Ji-yu patted Su Cheng on the shoulder, and distanced herself imperceptibly from her. "I met the eldest son Qinjian when I was in Wei Guo. He is 4 years older than the princess. Congratulations to the princess." He leaned slightly to salute according to the vacant distance, which was just right. Su Cheng was silent. She seemed so shocked that she couldn't speak for a long time. "You congratulate me, you actually." She gritted her teeth and said, "I just don't want to marry him, so I don't want to be traded as an item by them. I want to marry Princess." Ji-yu's voice was still gentle but resolute, so Su Cheng stopped talking. He stood up and said slowly, "Princess, the marriage is the order of the parents and the words of the matchmaker, not to mention that Shaya and I have always been on good terms, etiquette and righteousness cannot be violated." He said the words propriety and righteousness must not be violated word by word. Su Cheng trembled, stood up too, approached Ji-yu step by step, raised his hand and placed it on his chest. She kept staring at Ji-yu without blinking her eyes. "Don't worry about etiquette, you just need to say, do you like me or not, and do you want to marry me?" Ji-yu's voice sounded very calm, "The princess has a heavenly appearance and excellent talent. Is there anyone in the world who doesn't like it? Can I marry you if I like it?" Su Cheng shook her head, she was a little anxious. "Of course not. Only someone I like can marry me." "So the princess thinks, you like me?" "Yes." Su Cheng blinked and lowered his eyes. With her temperament, she took the initiative to say such words, presumably because of her deep affection. Ji-yu smiled noncommittally, and lowered his head to look deeply into Su Cheng's eyes. "Princess Yuzhuan, do you really understand me? We've only known each other for 2 months. Is it true that I'm someone you can entrust to your life? Your Royal Highness, there are temporary temptations, but a lifetime is a much longer thing. Don't be obsessed with it." Su Cheng obviously didn't listen to Ji-yu's words. She said, Are you worried that I can't bear not having a fixed place, running around, not being able to bear the lack of servants, and doing it myself?" "Yes, you really can't bear it, and you don't have to bear it." Ji-yu smiled, wiped the tears from Su Cheng's face, and said slowly, "His Royal Highness should live aloft and have no worries about food and clothing for the rest of his life. It's far more important than love. Su Cheng, I won't elope with you." Su Cheng's voice trembled uncontrollably. "After all, you just don't love me enough." Ji-yu thought for a while and said, "If you want to understand this way, you can." Su Cheng took a few steps back slowly, and fell to the ground disheartened. Her desperation and his ease made her even more embarrassed. Fortunately, she didn't know that the marriage with Wei Guo was Ji-yu's suggestion, and the marriage between her and Qing Yan was facilitated by Ji-yu. Ji-yu called me out to see Su Cheng off, and I walked out from behind the screen to salute Su Cheng. She looked at me blankly, then suddenly raised her hand and pulled out a red hairpin from her head, and stabbed it straight at her neck amidst the silver light. Ji and I shot almost at the same time. Zhu Chai made long wounds on my arm and his arm one after another, and was finally held by Ji. Blood dripped from my arm and landed on his arm, mingling with his. Su Cheng covered her mouth. She didn't scream out, but cried silently. Mrs. Xiang treats you so well. Did you just think for a moment that if you died in the Xiang family, how sad the old lady would be? Ji said slowly, and Su Cheng shook his head again and again. When the beauty cries, it is also pear blossoms with rain, which is pitiful. I looked at Ji and signaled him to leave first. Ji nodded and said, Aji, please persuade your royal highness. He let go of his hand, and Zhu Chai fell to the ground with a crisp jingling sound, accompanied by blood dripping from between his fingers, like plum blossoms blooming around Zhu Chai. His blood color was darker than that of ordinary people, and the way his sleeves were dyed red was even more shocking. Su Cheng turned his face away from him, and Ji left the room with a smile. When Ji's footsteps faded away, she finally couldn't help crying loudly. She laughed while crying, and said in a trembling voice, I am Princess Yuzhuan, and I have the blood of the royal family on my body. My father and His Majesty love me so much. But they sold me so easily. I never sold it to that person. What kind of prince have you met? Why? I looked at her silently, as if I saw period through her. If it wasn't for the fall of Qi, there might be such a day in Kikai. Everything has a price, and this is the price of being a princess and prince who is favored above tens of thousands of people. Even those country girls can marry whoever they like, why can't I? She choked up and said. I knelt down, looked at her at the same level in front of her, looked into her twinkling eyes, and said calmly, Are those country girls really much worse than you? She glared at me, and I smiled. Of course you are a nobleman of the royal family, a beauty famous in Kyushu, but you did not earn your birth, beauty and national status. As for talent, if you work hard all day long and suffer from food and clothing, how can you study poetry? Music? After all, those ordinary girls may not be smart and beautiful, but they are just not as lucky as you. If they all complain like you, there are too many unforgivable things in this world. What are you talking about? There is a difference between honor and inferiority, the destiny is like this. Su Cheng stared at me, his arrogance and anger overshadowed his sadness. I couldn't help laughing, and shook my head. Does the princess know how many countries perish every year, and how many nobles become slaves? Believe in the difference between the superior and the inferior, it is better to believe that there are gains and losses. If you want to have everything perfect, I'm afraid it's just nothing. Besides, the worst thing to live is death. You're not even afraid of death, are you still afraid of living? What kind of person Qingjian is and how he will treat you in the future is unknown. If you don't want to believe him and run away from marriage, don't care about Qingyan or Jiyu, give up your glory and wealth and become a commoner woman, then you will have the freedom to marry in the future. If you want honor and freedom at the same time, I'm afraid it's too greedy pass. Su Cheng stared at me blankly, anger and sadness collided in one place, and finally entangled into a daze with nowhere to go. In the end, she covered her eyes and prostrated herself on the ground, and said in a barely audible voice, If it were him, I would definitely choose freely. I really like him, I really like him. If it weren't for Jiyu, she might not be in such a mess. If you don't know that his goodness is just acting, if you don't know that behind his gentle smile is full of calculations and scheming, if you really think that you are in love with such a person, there is no woman in the world who will not be tempted. I picked up Zhu Chai and wiped off the blood, put it back into her bun, and said softly, People's hearts are changeable, and it is rare to be consistent. Princess, go back and have a good sleep. When you wake up, tell me about Jiyu. Forget everything about it. Jiyu is not worthy of your dignity for him, he is not worthy of you. Su Cheng raised her red eyes from crying and stared at me, surprised and then puzzled. She suddenly grabbed my arm, regardless of the blood on her hands. Who are you? She looked at me. I was silent for a while, then said with a smile, I am young Master Jiu's servant, Aji. How could an ordinary servant say such a thing? Who are you? I'm Aji. You. She clenched my hand and approached me slightly as if she wanted to find some clues from me. She asked word by word, who are you? With red eyes and tears in them, it's hard to be majestic no matter how you want to. I couldn't help shaking my head with a smile, Your Highness, is it important who I am? Now I am Aji, just Aji. No matter how Su Cheng asked me, there was only one sentence. Although she was angry and puzzled, she was helpless. In fact, it has nothing to do with me, it's just that she can't accept being persuaded by an ordinary girl after all. When Su Cheng left, his eyes were still swollen, but his expression had returned to his indifferent and haughty look, and he even looked colder than usual. She walked through the courtyard in a long orange dress, didn't look for Jiu again, got into the carriage and went back to the palace without looking back. Jiu asked me to treat the wound. Chang Li had just helped him treat the wound when I arrived in the room. He leaned on the soft bed to read a book, holding the book in his left hand, and the gauze wrapped around his right forearm extended to the back of his hand. Chang Li frowned and said, Fortunately, it's a flesh injury. You are the hand that plays the piano. After that, she turned to look at me, and called me impatiently to bandage the wound. I looked down at my arm, the wound about long was longer than his, and the blood on the wound had solidified, leaving mottled marks. It's just that I can't play the piano, I can't paint, and I can't dance, so this arm is naturally not so precious. Changle wiped my wound clean with water and applied medicine to me. I said to Jiu, Su Cheng is gone. Jiu nodded, and said flatly, Don't talk too much about today's matter, just say that I scratched myself. He looked calm, even indifferent. Su Cheng's visit was within his expectation, and even her attempt to commit suicide didn't arouse him too much emotion, which is completely different from Jiu who was once gentle and considerate to Su Cheng. He plays fast. It seems that this person has been loved by many people for a long time, so he is also used to squandering. I hope that a Yao can grow up loved by many people, not like me. But I also hope that he is really kind, gentle, and bright, just like when I met him. Jiu turned her head and asked me, What do you see me doing? I smiled and said, You look so pretty. People's hearts are changeable, and it is rare to always be. If he wasn't a Yao, I shouldn't hate him so much.